The gunshot cracked through the Wyoming dust before Lydia Monroe even saw the cowboy's face. One moment she stood beside the stagecoach, adjusting her Boston gloves. The next, a bullet shattered the lantern 3 feet from her head. The young man they'd hired to escort her west moved like lightning, his revolver drawn, his body shielding hers, his voice deadly calm. "Get down." She'd expected safety on this journey. She hadn't expected him. And she certainly hadn't expected to fall in love with a man who'd been paid simply to keep her alive. Before we ride into this epic tale of danger, devotion, and destiny, I need you to do something for me. Stay with this story until the very end. You won't regret it. And when you're done, drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see just how far across this world our story travels. Now, let's head back to where it all began. The Wyoming Territory stretched endlessly under a sky so vast it seemed to swallow the horizon whole. It was the kind of blue that made a person feel simultaneously infinite and insignificant, the kind that reminded anyone foolish enough to look up that nature didn't give a damn about their plans, their problems, or their pretty clothes packed in leather trunks. Lydia Monroe stepped down from the overland stage with as much dignity as a woman could muster after 3 days of being rattled like dice in a cup. Dust clung to her deep green traveling dress, the one she'd commissioned specifically for this journey west. The seamstress in Boston had promised the fabric would withstand the rigors of frontier travel. That seamstress, Lydia now understood, was a bold-faced liar. "Miss Monroe?" The voice came from somewhere to her left, low, measured, with the kind of Western drawl that turned 2 syllables into 3. Lydia turned, one gloved hand still gripping the stage door for balance, and found herself looking at a man who was decidedly not what she'd expected. Her father had hired an experienced trail guide. In Lydia's imagination, shaped by dime novels and her cousin Margaret's breathless accounts of rough frontiersmen, this had translated into a grizzled veteran of the plains, someone weathered and ancient, possibly missing teeth, certainly smelling of whiskey and tobacco. The man standing before her was none of those things. Cole Tanner couldn't have been more than 30. He stood a few inches over 6 feet, lean in the way of men who spent their lives in the saddle rather than behind a desk. His hat sat low enough to shadow his face, but she could see the sharp line of his jaw, the sun-weathered tan of his skin, and eyes that were an unsettling shade of blue, the color of deep water, calm on the surface but suggesting dangerous depths below. "That would be me," Lydia replied, pulling herself up to her full height, which still left her a good 8 inches shorter than him. "And you are?" "Cole Tanner, ma'am. Your father contracted me to escort you to Oregon." His gaze drifted past her to the mountain of luggage the stage driver was hauling down. 3 large trunks, 2 smaller cases, a hat box, and what appeared to be a portable writing desk. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in those blue eyes. "That all yours?" "I'm relocating permanently, Mr. Tanner. I require my belongings." "You require to travel light," he said, still looking at her luggage with the kind of assessment a general might give to a hopeless military position. "We've got 2,000 miles of trail ahead, 3 horses between us. That load would sink a riverboat." Heat crept up Lydia's neck. "My father paid you to get you to Oregon alive," Cole interrupted, meeting her eyes directly now. "Not to haul your wardrobe across the Rockies. You pick 1 trunk. The rest stays or ships by freight wagon, if it ships at all." "That's absurd. My books alone." "Books are heavy. They're also essential." For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. "You planning to read your way across hostile territory?" "I'm planning," Lydia said coldly, "to maintain some semblance of civilization regardless of geography." The stage driver, a barrel-chested man named Hewitt, who'd spent 3 days describing every person he'd ever known who'd been killed by Indians, cleared his throat loudly. "Tanner's right, miss. Trail ain't no place for fancy things. Seen more than one party lose everything trying to carry too much. Pride comes before the fall, as Scripture says." "Thank you, Mr. Hewitt, for that spiritual counsel," Lydia replied, not taking her eyes off Cole. "However, I fail to see why a woman should be expected to abandon all comfort simply because—" The rest of her sentence died as Cole moved past her, picked up her smallest trunk, the one containing her most practical clothes and a single cherished book of Tennyson's poetry, and carried it toward two horses tied to the hitching post. A third horse, a sturdy-looking pack animal, stood beside them. "That one," he called back. "You've got 10 minutes to transfer anything critical from the others. Hewitt, the rest goes back east or sits here. Miss Monroe can wire instructions from the next town." Lydia's hands clenched into fists inside her gloves. She'd been dismissed, managed, decided for. All the things she'd traveled 2,000 miles to escape. The whole point of accepting her aunt's invitation to Oregon had been to flee her father's suffocating control, her brother's condescending management, the entire Boston society that treated her like a decorative object rather than a human being with thoughts and ambitions. And now here stood this cowboy, this hired hand, making unilateral decisions about her possessions as if she were a child. "Mr. Tanner Cole," he said, not looking up from checking the pack horse's straps. "Mr. Tanner," she repeated firmly, "I understand you have experience with trail travel. However, I am not accustomed to being ordered about like someone who's never spent a night outside in her life." Cole straightened, turning to face her fully. His voice remained level, but there was steel underneath now. "Like someone who doesn't know the difference between 20 miles and 200? Like someone who'd die of exposure in the first mountain pass because she insisted on carrying hat boxes instead of warm blankets." The words hit like slaps, not because they were cruel, his tone held no cruelty, but because they were devastatingly accurate. Lydia had read extensively about the Western Territories. She'd studied maps, consulted travel guides, interviewed two women who'd made the journey by wagon train, but reading about the frontier and surviving it were entirely different propositions. 10 minutes, Cole repeated, but quieter this time. "Choose what matters." He walked away then, giving her privacy to sort through her belongings, to make the small, devastating choices that would define her journey. Lydia stood frozen for a moment, fury and humiliation warring in her chest. Then, because she was fundamentally practical despite her pride, she knelt beside her trunks and began the brutal process of reduction. Her second-best dress, a warm shawl, clean underthings, enough for a week, not the month's worth she'd packed, sturdy boots, her writing journal, and 2 pens. The Tennyson stayed. 3 novels of moral improvement went. Her mother's silver brush, but not the matching mirror. Practical soap instead of the rose-scented kind. Each choice felt like amputation. That's wise. She hadn't heard Cole return. He stood a few feet away, holding out a rolled bundle. "Extra blanket," he said. "Nights get cold even in summer once you're in the high country. And this." He produced a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days. "Sun out here will cook you faster than you think. That fancy bonnet won't help." Lydia took both items wordlessly. The blanket was thick wool, well-maintained. The hat smelled faintly of leather oil and something else. Sage, maybe, or the particular scent of long distances traveled. "Your father spoke highly of you," Cole said, watching as she attempted to fit the blanket into her reduced trunk. "Said you were educated, determined, that you'd insisted on making this trip despite half of Boston trying to talk you out of it. Did he also tell you he was hoping the frontier would cure me of my inappropriate ambitions?" The bitterness escaped before she could stop it. Cole's eyebrow rose a fraction. "He mentioned you wanted to be a writer." He mentioned it the way one mentions an unfortunate rash. Lydia stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "My father believes women's minds are suited for needlework and managing servants. The idea that I might have intellectual aspirations is, to him, evidence of rebellion rather than capability." "And is he right?" Cole asked. "Are you rebelling?" The question caught her off guard. Not its content, but the way he asked it, with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Lydia studied his face, looking for the smirk or condescension she'd learned to expect from men when they discussed her writing. She found neither. "I'm pursuing what interests me," she said carefully. "If that constitutes rebellion, then every man who follows his own path is equally guilty." Cole nodded slowly, as if considering this. "Fair enough," he gestured to the packed horse. "We're burning daylight. Can you ride?" "I've ridden in Boston." "That's not what I asked." Lydia lifted her chin. "I can sit a horse without falling off, if that's your concern." "It'll do for now." Cole moved to the horses, checking straps and buckles with practiced efficiency. We'll cover about 30 miles today if the weather holds. There's a way station at Copper Creek, barn, well, place to sleep that's not the ground. After that, we'll be camping rough for several days until we hit Fort Bridger. He spoke matter-of-factly, already assuming her cooperation. And despite everything, the reduced luggage, the cavalier dismissal of her concerns, the sheer presumption of his authority, Lydia found herself nodding. Because what else could she do? The stage was already pulling away. Hewitt had her remaining trunks loaded and was waving a farewell that looked suspiciously like good riddance. Her only choice was forward, and forward meant following Cole Tanner into country she couldn't begin to imagine. "The mare's name is Duchess," Cole said, bringing over a roan horse with intelligent eyes. "She's steady, won't spook easy. Keep a light hand on the reins. She's trained to neck rein, so you guide with pressure, not pulling. You fall behind, you call out. You see something that worries you, you call out. You need to stop for any reason, you call out. Clear?" Remarkably clear. "Good." He helped her mount, his hands impersonal but steady on her waist, lifting as if she weighed nothing, and then swung onto his own horse, a tall buckskin gelding that looked as weathered and capable as its rider. "Stay close, our trail's safe enough this stretch, but safe is relative out here." They rode out of the settlement as the sun climbed toward noon. Lydia had been moving west for days now, but somehow it wasn't until this moment, sitting in a saddle with the last buildings falling away behind her, nothing ahead but rolling grassland and distant mountains, that the full weight of her decision hit home. She was alone in the wilderness with a stranger her father trusted, yes, but still someone she'd known for all of 20 minutes. Everything familiar was behind her. Everything ahead was unknown. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, Lydia felt something unexpected, exhilaration. For the first time in her 26 years, no one was watching. No one was judging. No society matrons to whisper about her unmarried state. No father to redirect her toward suitable feminine pursuits. No brother to pat her head and explain why her opinions, while charming, weren't quite relevant to serious discussion. Just the trail, the sky, and the silent cowboy riding ahead. "Mr. Tanner?" she called after an hour of silence. "Cole?" he said without turning around. "Cole, then. Why did my father choose you specifically?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "We have history." "What kind of history?" "The kind that matters." He still hadn't looked back. "Your father's a good man. When I needed someone to vouch for me, he did. When I needed work that wasn't," he paused, choosing words carefully, "wasn't on the wrong side of the law, he provided it. I owe him. That's all you need to know." But it wasn't all Lydia needed to know. The carefully constructed answer only raised more questions. What had Cole done that required vouching? What kind of work existed on the wrong side of the law? And why would her meticulously proper father have any connection to someone with that kind of past? She was opening her mouth to press further when Cole raised his hand sharply, a clear signal to stop. Lydia pulled Duchess to a halt, heart suddenly hammering. "What is it?" "Riders," Cole said quietly, his hand moving to rest on his revolver. 3, maybe 4, coming from the northwest, moving fast. Lydia strained to hear anything over the wind rustling through the grass, the creak of saddle leather, her own quick breathing. Nothing. "I don't hear—" "You will." Cole's voice held the kind of certainty that came from experience. "When they get closer, you stay behind me. You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't make eye contact unless I tell you to. Understand?" "Who are they?" "Don't know yet. Could be cowboys heading home. Could be drifters looking for easy prey." He glanced back at her, and for the first time she saw something other than calm calculation in his face. Concern. "Most likely it's nothing, but we prepare for something." The riders appeared 5 minutes later, cresting a low rise about a quarter-mile out. 4 men on horseback, moving at a pace that suggested purpose rather than leisure. Even from a distance, Lydia could see they were rough-looking, trail-worn clothes, battered hats, the kind of men who lived hard and probably died the same way. "Easy," Cole murmured, though whether to Lydia or the horses she couldn't tell. "Let them come." The riders altered course, angling directly toward them. Lydia's fingers tightened on her reins. Every instinct screamed to run, but Cole sat utterly still, projecting a calm that seemed to slow time itself. The men pulled up about 10 feet away. The leader, a thick-shouldered man with a beard that looked like it housed wildlife, grinned, showing gaps where teeth used to be. "Well now," he said, his eyes sliding over Lydia like oil. "Ain't this a pretty picture? Gentleman and a lady out for a scenic ride." "Afternoon," Cole said neutrally. "Fine day for traveling." "Indeed it is." The bearded man's smile widened. "Where you folks headed?" "Oregon." "Long way to go." One of the other riders, younger with a scar running down his cheek, edged his horse closer. "Dangerous trail. Lots of things can happen to people out here. Accidents, thefts, worse." Cole's posture didn't change, but something in the air shifted. Lydia felt it like a drop in temperature before a storm. "We'll manage," Cole said quietly. "Sure you will." The leader leaned forward in his saddle. "Thing is, friend, management requires resources. Now my associates and I, we provide a service. Trail protection, you might say. Keep bad elements away from decent folks. Of course, service like that costs. We're not interested." The words cut through the conversation like a knife. The smile faded from the bearded man's face. "Now, friend, I don't think you heard me properly." "I heard fine." Cole's hand remained steady on his thigh, inches from his revolver. "You're running a protection racket, probably hitting every traveler on this stretch. Some pay because they're scared. Some pay because they don't know better. We're doing neither." The four men exchanged glances. Lydia's heart was beating so hard she was certain they could hear it. This was insane. They were outnumbered, miles from any help, and Cole was refusing men who were clearly dangerous. What was he thinking? "Big words from one man with a woman to protect," the scarred rider said. "One man's enough." Cole's voice dropped lower. "Question is whether you want to find out if I'm bluffing." The tension stretched like wire. Lydia couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Everything depended on the next 30 seconds. These men could kill them both, leave their bodies for the coyotes, and no one would know until her father received a telegram that his daughter never arrived in Oregon. Then the leader laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Hell, maybe you are crazy enough. Crazy men are unpredictable, and unpredictable ain't worth the trouble." He spat into the dirt. "Enjoy your ride, friend. Hope you make it all the way to Oregon. Hope your pretty lady friend does, too." He wheeled his horse around, the others following. In moments, they were riding away, disappearing over the same rise they'd appeared from. Lydia released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Oh my God! Oh my God, they could have killed us." "But they didn't!" Cole urged his horse forward, gesturing for her to follow. "And they won't. Men like that are predators. They hunt fear. Show them you're not afraid, or convince them the cost is too high, and they move on to easier targets." "You were bluffing," Lydia said, hearing the shake in her own voice. "They had us 4-2. We had no chance." Cole glanced back, and this time there was definitely a smile. Small, but real. "I was absolutely bluffing, but the key to a good bluff, Miss Monroe, is selling it like truth." Despite everything, the danger, the fear still coursing through her veins, Lydia laughed. It came out slightly hysterical, but it was a laugh nonetheless. "You're insane." "Maybe." Cole faced forward again. "But I got us through, didn't I?" "This time." "Every time," he said, and she could hear the promise in it. "That's what your father paid me for." They rode in silence for the next hour, Lydia processing what had just happened. She'd read about frontier danger in her extensive research, but reading about the possibility of violence and having 4 armed men look at you like you're something to be taken, those were entirely different experiences. The reality of her situation was settling into her bones. She was vulnerable here in ways she'd never been in Boston. Wealth and breeding and education meant nothing if someone decided to hurt her. But Cole had stood between her and that threat without hesitation. He'd risked his life on a bluff that could have gotten them both killed, and he'd done it with the kind of steady competence that suggested this wasn't his first time staring down danger. Who was this man her father had hired, and why did she get the feeling that the careful answer he'd given earlier about owing her father, about staying on the right side of the law, was hiding a much more complicated story. "Can I ask you something?" she said as the sun began its slow descent toward the western mountains. "You're going to anyway." "Why do you owe my father?" Cole was silent for so long she thought he'd refuse to answer. They crested a small hill, and below them stretched a valley with a thin ribbon of creek running through it. The way station, presumably, a collection of rough buildings that promised shelter for the night. "I was 17, Cole said finally, his voice carrying a weight that suggested this wasn't a story he told often. Running with a bad crowd. Desperate, angry, convinced the world owed me something. We were planning to rob a bank in Denver, my first serious crime. Your father was there on business. He saw me watching the bank, saw whatever it was that gave me away. Could have called the law. Should have, probably. Instead, he pulled me aside and offered me a choice." "What kind of choice?" "Work or jail." Cole's hands moved absently on his reins, a nervous gesture that seemed out of character. "He said he'd hire me as a ranch hand, pay fair wages, teach me a legitimate trade. Or he could alert the marshal and I could take my chances with a judge. Said it was up to me, but that I had 30 seconds to decide." "And you chose work." "I chose survival." He glanced back at her. "Your father gave me something I'd never had before. A chance. No judgment, no demands that I explain my whole sorry history. Just work, wages, and expectations. I spent 2 years working his ranch in Montana. Learned everything about horses, cattle, trail riding. When I left, it was with his blessing and a reference that got me work up and down the territory. Lydia absorbed this, seeing her father in a new light. Ambrose Monroe was many things, controlling, traditional, frustratingly paternalistic, but apparently also capable of unexpected mercy. He never mentioned you." "Why would he? He's helped dozens of men over the years. I wasn't special." Cole guided them down the slope toward the way station. "But when he sent word that his daughter needed escort to Oregon and was I available, there wasn't a question. I owed him. Still do." "So I'm a debt payment," Lydia said, trying to keep her tone light. Cole pulled his horse to a stop just outside the way station. He turned in his saddle to look at her fully, his blue eyes catching the last rays of sunlight. "You're a responsibility I take seriously," he corrected. "There's a difference." Something in the way he said it made her pulse quicken. Not fear this time. Something else, something she couldn't quite name but felt all the way through her chest. "Come on," Cole said, swinging down from his horse. "Let's get you settled before dark." The way station at Copper Creek was exactly as advertised, a barn that smelled of horses and hay, a well with water that tasted like minerals, and a one-room cabin with sleeping pallets that had seen better decades. The station keeper, a wizened woman named Mrs. Calloway, who looked about 100 years old, took one look at Lydia and cackled. "City girl," she pronounced, as if identifying a new species. "How long you think this one'll last, Tanner?" "She'll last," Cole said, dropping their packs inside the door. "She's tougher than she looks." They always say that. Then the first rattlesnake shows up and suddenly they're booking passage back east. Mrs. Calloway turned her sharp eyes on Lydia. "You scared of snakes, girl?" "I've never encountered one," Lydia admitted. "You will. Everything out here wants to bite you, sting you, or eat you. Sometimes all three." The old woman cackled again, clearly enjoying herself. "Supper's beans and cornbread, water's outside, privy's out back, watch for scorpions." She shuffled away, leaving Lydia standing in the dim cabin, feeling distinctly out of her depth. Cole was already unrolling his bedroll on one side of the room, creating a clear division of space. "She's trying to scare you," he said without looking up. "Probably works on half the travelers who come through. Makes her feel useful." "Is she wrong? About the snakes and scorpions?" "No," Cole admitted, "but fear's less useful than caution. You'll learn the difference." Lydia set down her reduced trunk and looked around the cabin. The floor was packed dirt. The walls were rough-hewn logs with gaps that let in wind. There was no furniture beyond the sleeping pallets and a single rough table with a candle stub. By Boston standards, this place would have been condemned as unfit for human habitation. And yet, as she sat down on her pallet and pulled off her dusty traveling boots, Lydia felt something unexpected. Satisfaction. She'd survived her first day. She'd faced down dangerous men, made impossible choices about possessions, and proven, if only to herself, that she could endure discomfort without collapsing into helplessness. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Miss Monroe? Cole's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He was standing by the door, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Supper in 10 minutes. Thought you might want to wash up first. She nodded, rising stiffly. Her legs ached from hours in the saddle. Tomorrow, she knew, would be worse. Thank you. And Cole? He paused, waiting. Thank you, she repeated, for not leaving me behind. I'm sure I've already made your job harder than it needs to be. For a long moment, Cole just looked at her. Then, impossibly, he smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face, making him look younger and somehow more accessible. Day's not over yet, Miss Monroe. Plenty of time for you to make it harder. He stepped out into the evening, leaving her alone with the first genuine laugh she'd had in months. Maybe, Lydia thought, this journey wouldn't be entirely unbearable. Maybe, despite the danger and discomfort, there were unexpected gifts to be found along the trail. And maybe, just maybe, the most unexpected gift was the quiet cowboy with blue eyes who'd been paid to protect her, but who was already teaching her something far more valuable than safety. He was teaching her strength, her own. The dawn came cold and unforgiving, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gray and pale gold. Lydia woke to the sound of horses shifting in the barn and the distant call of a bird she couldn't name. Every muscle in her body screamed protest as she sat up, the simple act of moving revealing exactly how unprepared her Boston-bred body had been for a full day in the saddle. Cole was already outside. She could hear him talking quietly to the horses. Through the gaps in the cabin walls, she watched him move with that same easy efficiency he'd shown yesterday, checking hooves, adjusting straps, preparing for the day ahead, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Which, she supposed, for him it was. Mrs. Calloway appeared with tin cups of coffee so strong it could strip paint and johnny cakes that tasted like sweetened cardboard. "Eat up, city girl," the old woman commanded. "Long day ahead. Tanner says you're pushing for the Little Snake River by nightfall." "How far is that?" Lydia asked, forcing down the johnny cake with gulps of the brutal coffee. 35 miles if the trail's good. 40 if it ain't." Mrs. Calloway studied her with those sharp eyes. "You'll make it or you won't. Either way, the trail don't care about your feelings." It was, Lydia was learning, the frontier philosophy in a nutshell. The land didn't bend to accommodate weakness. You either adapted or you failed, and failure out here carried consequences more severe than social embarrassment. They were mounted and moving by the time the sun cleared the eastern horizon. Cole set a steady pace, not pushing hard but not dawdling either. The landscape rolled past in endless variations of grass and sky, occasionally broken by rocky outcroppings or distant tree lines that marked the presence of water. "We're going to work on your riding," Cole announced after the first hour. "You sit like you're in a parlor, all stiff and proper. That'll break you in half before we hit the mountains." "I'm sitting the way I was taught," Lydia said defensively. "You were taught wrong." He brought his horse alongside hers, close enough that their legs nearly touched. "Watch my posture. See how I'm moving with the horse, not against it. Your spine should be straight but flexible. Let your hips absorb the motion. Stop fighting every step." Lydia tried to mimic his position, immediately feeling awkward and exposed. "This feels wrong." "Because it's different, not because it's wrong. Trust the process." He watched her critically for a few minutes, then nodded. "Better. Now relax your shoulders. You're carrying tension like a yoke." "Perhaps because I'm being constantly corrected," she muttered. Cole's mouth twitched toward a smile. "Would you rather I let you ride yourself into crippling pain? Because that's the alternative. Out here, pride's expensive and comfort's earned." He was right, damn him. By midday, when they stopped to water the horses at a small creek, Lydia could already feel the difference. Her back ached less. The jarring impact of each step felt more manageable. She was learning, however reluctantly, to speak the horse's language. "How did you learn all this?" she asked as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, eating jerky and hard biscuits that required serious commitment to chew. "The riding, the trailcraft, all of it?" Cole was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon in that way he had, always watching, always aware. "Necessity, mostly. After I left your father's ranch, I hired on with different outfits. Cattle drives, freight hauling, some military scouting. You pick things up when your life depends on it. Military scouting, Lydia repeated. That sounds dangerous. It was. He took a long drink from his canteen. Apache territory mostly. This was back in 78, 79. I was young and stupid enough to think I was invincible. He touched his left shoulder absently, and Lydia noticed for the first time a slight unevenness in the way he held himself. An old injury, perhaps? Got educated real quick on that front. What happened? Nothing worth repeating, but his voice had gone distant, pulled into memory. Let's just say I learned that being fast with a gun don't mean much if you're not faster with your mind. They rode on through the afternoon, the landscape gradually shifting as they moved closer to the river. The grass grew taller here, fed by underground water. Wildflowers dotted the slopes, purple lupine and yellow balsam root creating swaths of color that seemed almost defiant against the harsh environment. It's beautiful, Lydia said, almost to herself. It is, Cole agreed. Hard, but beautiful. That's the thing people don't understand about the West. They think it's all violence and lawlessness. And sure, there's plenty of that, but there's also this. He gestured at the vast landscape around them. Space, freedom, the chance to be something other than what you were born to be. Is that what you wanted? To be something different? Cole glanced at her, something complicated moving behind his eyes. I wanted to not be the kid whose daddy drank himself to death and whose mama followed 6 months later. Wanted to not be the boy everyone expected would end up hanged or shot before he turned 20. He paused. Your father gave me the chance to write a different story. I'm still writing it. The vulnerability in his words caught Lydia off guard. This was the man who'd stared down 4 armed riders without flinching, who moved through this dangerous landscape with complete confidence. And yet beneath that weathered exterior was someone still figuring out who he was, still trying to escape the gravity of a difficult past. I understand something about that, she said quietly, wanting to be seen as something other than what people expect. The rebellious daughter? There was no mockery in his tone, just curiosity. The disappointing daughter, Lydia corrected. I'm 26, unmarried, and uninterested in remedying that situation. I read philosophy and write essays that challenge social conventions. I argue with my father's business associates about politics and economics. I am, by Boston standards, a catastrophe of femininity. Cole made a sound that might have been a laugh. Sounds like Boston standards need adjusting. Tell that to Boston. Lydia watched a hawk circle overhead, riding thermals with effortless grace. My aunt in Oregon is a widow. She runs her own boarding house, writes for the local newspaper, and by all accounts lives exactly as she pleases. My father thinks her influence will be disastrous for me. He's probably right, but not in the way he means. What do you want? Cole asked. Not what your father wants. Not what society expects. What do you actually want for your life? No one had ever asked her that before. Not directly. Not with genuine interest in the answer. Lydia took her time responding, wanting to get it right. I want to write things that matter, she said finally. Not poetry about flowers or moral tales for children. I want to write about real life, about the way society constrains people, particularly women, about the gap between what we're told and what's actually true. I want... She hesitated, then pushed forward. I want my words to change how people think. That's ambitious, Cole observed. It's impossible, Lydia said flatly. At least in Boston, women writers are tolerated if they stay in acceptable lanes. Step outside those boundaries and you're dismissed as hysterical or presumptuous. My father burned my last manuscript, said it was for my own good, that such radical ideas would ruin my reputation beyond repair. What was it about? Marriage law. Specifically how women become legal property upon marriage with no rights to their own earnings, their children, or even their physical safety. She could still remember the sick feeling of watching those pages curl and blacken in the fireplace. I'd spent 8 months researching, writing, revising, gone in 10 minutes. Cole was quiet for a long stretch. When he finally spoke, his voice was harder than she'd heard it. I've seen men beat their wives bloody and face no consequences because the law said those women were their property to do with as they pleased. I've watched women trapped in situations that would make a prisoner's life look free. Your father was wrong to burn that manuscript. The validation hit Lydia like a physical thing. She'd expected dismissal or at best polite disinterest. Instead, Cole understood. A cowboy who'd grown up rough, who'd faced violence and hardship, saw the injustice she was trying to expose. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me, just keep writing. The West's full of women doing impossible things. You'll fit right in." They reached the Little Snake River as the sun touched the western horizon, painting the water gold and crimson. The crossing point was shallow here, marked by the remains of an old wagon someone had abandoned years before. Cole scouted the banks carefully before declaring it safe to make camp. "We'll rest the horses, eat, and push on before dawn," he said, already unloading their packs. "There's weather coming. Can you smell it?" Lydia inhaled deeply, trying to sense what he sensed. The air did feel different somehow, heavy with a promise she couldn't quite name. "Rain?" "Storm," Cole corrected. "Big one, probably. We need to make Fort Bridger day after tomorrow. There's shelter there, supplies. But between here and there is 40 miles of exposed country. If the storm catches us wrong, it could be trouble." He worked as he talked, setting up an efficient camp with the kind of practiced ease that spoke to countless nights spent exactly like this. Lydia tried to help, but mostly got in the way until Cole gently directed her to gather firewood from the riverside willows. As she walked the bank, arms filling with dry branches, Lydia found herself thinking about the strange intimacy of this arrangement. They'd known each other barely 2 days, yet she was trusting Cole with her life. They slept 20 feet apart with nothing but darkness between them. She was seeing him in contexts no Boston gentleman would ever be seen, working, sweating, living rough and unpolished. And somehow, impossibly, she was beginning to trust him in ways she'd never trusted the refined men her father had paraded through their parlor, all of them wearing proper suits and saying proper things while their eyes assessed her like livestock at auction. By the time she returned to camp, Cole had a small fire going and was setting up a tripod to hang a cooking pot. "Coffee first, then beans," he announced. "Not glamorous, but it's fuel." "I'm learning that glamour is in short supply out here," Lydia said, dropping her armload of wood. "Glamour's overrated," Cole added water to the pot from his canteen. "Give me competent over pretty any day." "I'll try to be competent then." He glanced up and she caught the flash of humor in his eyes. "You're doing fine, Miss Monroe. Better than fine, actually. Most folks in your position would still be complaining about the luggage." "Oh, I'm still bitter about the luggage," Lydia assured him. "I'm just saving my complaints for my memoir, How I Survived the West with Only One Trunk and My Dignity Mostly Intact." Cole laughed, a real, full laugh that transformed his face completely. "If you write that book, I'll read it." They ate as darkness settled over the prairie, the fire crackling companionably between them. The sky overhead was a riot of stars, more than Lydia had ever seen in her life. In Boston, gas lamps and coal smoke dimmed the heavens. Out here, the universe revealed itself in all its staggering immensity. "Makes you feel small, doesn't it?" Cole said, following her gaze. "Small, but somehow more real," Lydia replied. "Like the pretenses we maintain in civilization are exposed as ridiculous when measured against this. That's why some people can't handle it out here. They need the pretenses, need the rules and structures that tell them who they are and what they're worth." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "The West strips all that away. You're just yourself, for better or worse. And what have you discovered about yourself, being stripped down to essentials?" Cole considered this, his face half-shadowed by firelight. "That I'm more capable than I thought, more patient, that I'd rather be alone than with people who make me feel alone. That loyalty matters more than almost anything else." He paused. "And that the past doesn't have to define the future, as long as you're willing to do the work of changing." "Your father would have been proud," Lydia said softly, "of who you've become." "My father was a drunk who beat me when the mood struck and ignored me the rest of the time," Cole said without inflection. "If he'd be proud, it's because I turned out nothing like him." The bluntness of it stole Lydia's breath. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have assumed. You didn't know." Cole stood, stretching. Get some sleep. We're riding out at first light, and tomorrow's going to be harder than today. He walked to where he'd laid out his bedroll, effectively ending the conversation. Lydia sat by the dying fire a while longer, processing everything she'd learned. Cole Tanner carried his past like a weight he'd learned to balance but never put down. That moment of vulnerability, admitting to the father who'd failed him, to the desperate 17-year-old he'd been, felt like a gift, though she wasn't entirely sure why. She settled into her own bedroll, the ground hard beneath her despite the blankets. Above, the stars wheeled slowly across the sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. The sounds should have frightened her. Instead, they felt like a lullaby, ancient and strange. Lydia fell asleep thinking about words and stars and the unexpected complexity of the quiet man who'd been paid to keep her alive, but who was teaching her so much more than survival. The next day broke clear, but with that heavy feeling still pressing down from the sky. Cole was already up, checking the horses and studying the western horizon with an expression that didn't invite optimism. "How bad?" Lydia asked, rolling her stiff shoulders. "Bad enough." He handed her a cup of coffee without preamble. "We need to cover serious ground today. No long breaks, no sightseeing. The storm's coming whether we're ready or not." They rode hard, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. The landscape changed as they moved, becoming more broken and rough. They crossed dried creek beds and skirted rock formations that jutted from the earth like ancient monuments. The wind picked up as morning turned to afternoon, carrying the scent of distant rain. "Tell me about Oregon," Cole said during one brief rest. "Your aunt's boarding house. What are you expecting?" Lydia welcomed the distraction from her aching muscles and growing anxiety about the approaching weather. Aunt Catherine inherited the property from her husband. By all accounts, she's turned it into something of an institution. Clean rooms, good food, and a salon where people discuss everything from territorial politics to women's suffrage. My father thinks she's corrupting the frontier with dangerous ideas. "Sounds like my kind of place," Cole observed. "She expecting you?" "I sent a telegram from Cheyenne. She should know I'm coming, assuming it arrived." Lydia paused. "I'm half terrified she won't be what I'm hoping, that the stories I've told myself about her independence and freedom are exaggerated, that I'll get there and find out she's just as trapped as everyone else, just in different ways. And if she is, then I'll figure something else out." Lydia surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. "I didn't come this far to accept a life that doesn't fit. I'd rather scrub floors and wait tables than go back to being decorative and useless." Cole nodded approvingly. "That kind of determination will serve you well out here. The West rewards stubbornness more than pedigree." They mounted again, pushing toward Fort Bridger as the sky continued its slow darkening. It wasn't sunset, that was hours away, but rather the approach of the storm, clouds building like mountains in the west, their tops brilliant white against the deepening gray. "Cole?" Lydia called as they crested yet another rise. "How much farther?" 10 miles, maybe 12. His voice was tight. "We're not going to make it before the storm hits." As if in response, thunder rumbled across the distance, deep and ominous. The horse's ears flicked nervously. Lydia felt her own pulse quicken. "What do we do?" "Find shelter. Now." Cole was already scanning the landscape with urgent focus. "There. See that rock formation? Looks like there might be an overhang. It'll have to do." They pushed the horses into a canter, racing against the gathering storm. The wind was fierce now, whipping Lydia's hat from her head despite the chin strap. Dust devils spun across their path. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees in as many minutes. The rock formation was bigger than it had appeared from a distance, a tumbled collection of boulders that formed a natural shelter beneath an overhanging ledge. Cole urged the horses into the protected space just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. "Get under," he commanded, pulling packs and saddles with frantic efficiency. "Help me with the horses. We need them calm." Thunder crashed directly overhead, so loud it vibrated in Lydia's chest. The horses whinnied and tried to bolt, but Cole held them with steady hands and steady voice, talking them through their fear. "Easy now, easy. We're safe here. Storm's just noise and water. Easy." The rain arrived like a curtain dropping. One moment sporadic drops, the next a deluge so intense Lydia could barely see 10 feet beyond their shelter. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the landscape in stark white flashes. Wind howled through the rocks, carrying spray that soaked them despite their protection. Lydia found herself pressed against the back wall of the overhang, arms wrapped around herself, trying not to think about how small they were against this display of nature's power. Back in Boston, storms happened from behind glass windows. You watched them from the safety of a house built to withstand anything the weather could deliver. Out here, there was just rock and luck and the hope that lightning wouldn't choose this particular formation to strike. "Hey!" Cole's voice cut through the chaos. He'd secured the horses and was moving toward her. "You all right?" "Terrified," Lydia admitted, her voice shaking. I know." He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Your first big storm. It's a lot." Another lightning strike, close enough that the thunder was simultaneous with the flash. Lydia flinched violently, and without thinking, Cole's arm came around her shoulders, steady, solid, grounding. "It's just sound and light," he said calmly. "Can't hurt us under here. Rock's been standing for 10,000 years. It'll stand another night." "How do you stay so calm?" Lydia heard the note of hysteria in her own voice and hated it. "Practice, and because someone needs to be." His hand rubbed her shoulder in what might have been meant as a practical, comforting gesture, but felt like something more. "First time I was in a storm like this, I was 14, out with my uncle's cattle. Thought I was going to die. Cried like a baby when it passed, and I was still alive." The admission that Cole Tanner had once been scared, had once cried, helped somehow. Made this terror feel less like weakness and more like appropriate response. The storm raged for an hour, maybe more. Time became difficult to track with no sun visible, just the endless assault of rain and wind and thunder. Gradually, Lydia's terror settled into something more manageable. Cole's presence helped, his arms still around her shoulders, his voice occasionally pointing out details about the storm with the detachment of someone teaching a lesson. "See how the rain's falling at an angle? That's the wind direction. Storm's moving northeast, same way we're heading. By morning, it'll be past us. And the trail? Will be mud. But mud's better than lightning." When the rain finally began to ease, Cole carefully extracted his arm and moved to check on the horses. Lydia felt the loss of his warmth immediately, the evening air now cold after the storm's passage. She was soaked despite the shelter. Spray and blown rain had found every gap in her clothes. "We'll need a fire," Cole said, assessing their situation. "You're shivering. Problem is, everything's wet." "So, no fire?" "I didn't say that." He produced a small oilcloth package from his pack. Dry tinder, carefully preserved. Always keep your starting materials protected. First rule of survival. Within 20 minutes, he had a small fire going, fed by pieces of the saddles and packs that had stayed dry enough to burn. It wasn't much, but it pushed back the cold and gave them light as darkness settled over the storm-washed landscape. "Take off your jacket," Cole said, hanging his own coat near the fire to dry. "You'll freeze in wet clothes." Lydia hesitated, suddenly aware that removing her jacket would leave her in just her shirtwaist, which was probably translucent from the rain. "That's not appropriate." Cole looked at her with something between exasperation and amusement. "Miss Monroe, we're in the middle of nowhere. We nearly got struck by lightning, and we're going to be spending the night in a cave. Appropriate left the conversation about 1,000 miles ago. Now take off the damn jacket before you catch pneumonia." He had a point. Lydia carefully removed her jacket, trying not to think about how exposed she felt. Cole, to his credit, focused intently on arranging wet items near the fire, giving her the privacy of his inattention. "Here." He tossed her his dry blanket. "Wrap up. I'll use the saddle blankets." "You'll freeze." "I've been colder." He settled against the rock wall, looking utterly unbothered by their circumstances. "This is practically luxury compared to some places I've slept." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling, the storm rumbling away into the distance. Lydia's clothes began to steam gently in the heat. Her hair had come completely loose from its pins and hung in damp waves down her back. She probably looked like a drowned rat. "Cole?" she said into the quiet. "Earlier, when you talked about your father—" "I shouldn't have said that," he interrupted. "Wasn't fair to burden you with it." "It wasn't a burden. It was honest." Lydia pulled the blanket tighter. I appreciate honesty. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who say one thing and mean another, who hide behind propriety and implication. You say what you mean. It's refreshing. Cole studied the fire. Your father saved my life when he gave me that choice. Not just literally, though that's true enough. He saved who I could become. I was heading down a path that ended in violence and death. He showed me there was another way. He paused. I know you've got complicated feelings about him, but whatever else he is, he's a good man who believes in second chances. That's rare. He is good, Lydia acknowledged. He's also suffocating. He believes he knows what's best for everyone and enforces that belief with absolute certainty. It never occurs to him that his daughter might have valid desires that differ from his plans. That's most fathers, in my experience. Perhaps, but most daughters don't have the option to escape across 2,000 miles of wilderness. She smiled slightly. I suppose I should thank you for that, for making the escape possible. Thank your father. He's the one paying. No, Lydia said firmly. Thank you. You didn't have to take this job. From what you've said, you have plenty of work available. You chose to spend weeks escorting a difficult woman across dangerous territory. That deserves acknowledgement. Cole met her eyes across the fire, and something passed between them. An understanding, maybe, or the first stirring of something neither of them had names for yet. You're not difficult, he said quietly. You're determined. There's a difference. The words settled into Lydia's chest, warm and unexpected. In that moment, sitting in a cave with rain still pattering outside, clothes drying by firelight, she felt more seen than she had in years of Boston ballrooms and literary salons. Get some sleep, Cole said, breaking the moment. Tomorrow we need to make Fort Bridger, and the trail's going to be hell after this rain. Lydia lay down on the hard stone, the blanket wrapped around her, and watched the fire's shadows dance on the rock ceiling. 20 feet away, Cole sat with his back to the wall, keeping watch even though the danger had passed. She fell asleep wondering what it meant that she felt safer in a cave with a man she barely knew than she ever had in her father's house, surrounded by every comfort civilization could provide. The answer, she suspected, had less to do with circumstances and more to do with the quiet cowboy who'd shown her more respect in 3 days than most men had in her entire life. Morning came with deceptive gentleness, sunlight filtering through the mouth of their shelter and painting everything gold. Lydia woke to find Cole already moving around, checking the horses and assessing the damage from the night's storm. The world outside their rocky sanctuary looked washed clean, the colors somehow brighter and more vivid than before. Trail's going to be slow, he announced without preamble when he saw her stirring. Creek's running high and the ground's turned to soup in places. But we can still make Fort Bridger by nightfall if we don't waste time. Lydia's entire body protested as she sat up. Sleeping on stone had introduced her to muscles she hadn't known existed, each one now announcing its presence with enthusiastic complaints. Her jacket, hung near the fire's remains, was stiff and slightly scorched, but blessedly dry. Coffee? Cole offered, holding out a tin cup that steamed in the cool morning air. You're a saint, Lydia said fervently, accepting the cup with both hands. The coffee was strong enough to wake the dead and tasted faintly of smoke, but it was hot and caffeinated and therefore perfect. They broke camp efficiently, the routine already becoming familiar. Lydia found herself anticipating Cole's movements, understanding without words when he needed her to hold something or move aside or help steady a nervous horse. It was a strange intimacy, this wordless cooperation, born from necessity but feeling increasingly like partnership. The trail was exactly as bad as Cole had predicted. The horses sank ankle-deep in places, and twice they had to detour around sections where the path had simply washed away. The swollen creek they'd camped beside had transformed into a rushing torrent, brown with mud and carrying debris from upstream. Crossing was out of the question. We'll have to follow it north, Cole said, studying the water with narrowed eyes. There's a place about 5 miles up where it narrows and runs shallow over bedrock, assuming the storm didn't change the geography too much. Does that happen? Geography changing? Out here? All the time. Flash floods can carve new channels. Landslides can block old ones. The land's not fixed like you're used to. It moves, shifts, responds to what hits it. He guided his horse along the swollen bank. Like people, I guess. We're not fixed either. We change based on what we go through. It was an unexpectedly philosophical observation from a man who generally kept his thoughts practical and immediate. Lydia found herself turning the words over in her mind as they rode, considering her own changes. A week ago, she would have insisted she knew exactly who she was, a frustrated intellectual trapped in a society that had no use for women's minds. Now, after just days on the trail, she was beginning to suspect her identity was less fixed than she'd imagined. The crossing point, when they reached it, was passable but far from safe. The water rushed over smooth rock with violent force, white foam marking where the current hit obstacles. Cole studied it for long minutes, his expression grave. "It's risky," he finally said. "But the alternative is adding 2 days to our journey, and we're already behind schedule." He looked at Lydia directly. "I need you to trust me completely here. Do exactly what I say, when I say it. No hesitation, no questions. Can you do that?" The intensity in his blue eyes sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold water ahead. "Yes. I'll take the pack horse across first, see how the current handles, then I'll come back for you. When we cross, keep Duchess's head up and pointed straight across. Don't let her turn downstream. If she does, the current will sweep you both away. Keep your legs tight and your weight centered. If you go in the water, let go of the reins and swim for the opposite bank. Don't try to hang on to the horse. Understood?" Lydia's mouth had gone dry. "Understood." Cole crossed first, the pack horse struggling against the powerful current, but making it through with Cole's expert guidance. Then he came back, water streaming from his clothes, and positioned his horse beside Duchess. "Stay with me," he said. "Match my pace exactly." They entered the water together. The cold was shocking, even through her boots and skirts. Duchess balked, sensing danger, but Lydia urged her forward with legs and voice, doing her best to project a confidence she absolutely didn't feel. The current grabbed at them immediately, trying to push them downstream. Lydia could feel the horse's muscles straining, see the panic beginning to show in her eyes. "Steady!" Cole's voice cut through the roar of water. "You're doing fine. Keep her head up. That's it." The crossing couldn't have taken more than 2 minutes, but it felt like hours. Every second, Lydia expected to be swept away, to feel the horrible moment of losing control and being at the mercy of forces far beyond her strength. But Cole was there, his presence somehow making the impossible merely terrifying. When Duchess's hooves finally found purchase on the far bank and scrambled up onto solid ground, Lydia let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the reins. "You did good," Cole said, and the approval in his voice warmed her more than she wanted to admit. "Most folks freeze up their first dangerous crossing. You kept your head." "I was terrified." "Being terrified and doing it anyway is called courage." He swung down from his horse to check the pack loads, making sure nothing had been lost or damaged. "You've got more of it than you give yourself credit for." They rode on through morning into afternoon, the sun climbing high and hot, turning their damp clothes into steam. The landscape was changing again, becoming more dramatic as they approached the mountains. Pine forests appeared on distant slopes, dark green against the gray stone. The air smelled different here, sharper, cleaner, carrying hints of altitude. "Tell me about the worst storm you've ever been in," Lydia said, needing conversation to distract from her still jangling nerves. Cole was quiet for a moment, that considering silence she was learning meant he was deciding how much truth to share. "Winter of '79, up in Montana Territory. I was riding dispatch between 2 army posts carrying messages that couldn't wait for regular mail. Got caught in a blizzard that came out of nowhere, clear skies to white out in less than an hour. What happened? Lost the trail completely within minutes. Couldn't see my horse's ears in front of me. Temperature dropped so fast I could feel my fingers going numb, even through gloves." His voice was matter of fact, but Lydia could imagine the terror of it. "I gave the horse her head, trusted her to find shelter because I sure as hell couldn't. She brought us to an abandoned trapper's cabin, probably saved both our lives." "How long were you trapped?" 3 days. No food except some jerky in my pack. No real firewood except the cabin's furniture, which I broke up and burned piece by piece. Thought about a lot of things in those 3 days. He adjusted his hat against the sun. Mostly about how stupid I'd been, thinking I was tough enough to challenge nature. Nature doesn't care how tough you are. It'll kill you just as dead whether you're strong or weak. But you survived. Obviously, A slight smile. But I learned humility. Learned to respect what I can't control. Learned that sometimes survival is about luck as much as skill. And the smart thing is to stack the odds in your favor whenever possible. They crested a rise, and Fort Bridger appeared in the distance, a collection of buildings clustered around what had once been a trading post, now serving as a way station for travelers heading west. Smoke rose from several chimneys. Lydia could see people moving between structures, looking impossibly solid and real after days of seeing nothing but wilderness. Civilization, she breathed. Of a sort, Cole agreed. We'll get a real meal, real beds, and resupply. Then 2 more days to Green River, and after that we're in the mountains proper. That's where the journey gets serious. This hasn't been serious? He glanced at her, and this time the smile reached his eyes. Miss Monroe, this has been the easy part. Fort Bridger was rough even by frontier standards, but after days on the trail it looked like paradise to Lydia. The fort keeper, a massive man named Sutton, who looked like he'd been carved from the mountains themselves, eyed them with the practiced assessment of someone who'd seen every kind of traveler pass through. Got 1 room left, he announced. Storm brought in 3 other parties ahead of you. It's small but clean, and the roof don't leak much. We'll take it, Cole said before Lydia could speak. At her surprised look, he added quietly, It's the only room. You get the bed. I'll sleep in the stable with the horses. That's not necessary. It is. His tone left no room for argument. You need proper rest. So do I, but I can get that anywhere. Take the room. The room was indeed small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. But it had actual walls, an actual door that locked, and an actual window with glass that wasn't broken. Lydia stood in the center of it, feeling absurdly grateful for 4 walls and a ceiling. A knock came a few minutes later. A young woman with tired eyes brought a basin of hot water and clean towels. Supper's in an hour, she said. Stew and bread. Mr. Sutton says to tell you it's beef, not horse, despite what you might hear. Thank you, Lydia managed, trying not to think too hard about why that clarification was necessary. She washed as best she could with the hot water, scrubbing away days of trail dust and discovering bruises she didn't remember acquiring. Her face in the small mirror looked different, thinner, sun-darkened, somehow older. Or maybe not older, maybe just less sheltered. The woman looking back at her had crossed dangerous water and survived lightning storms. That woman was someone new. Supper was served in a communal dining hall that smelled of wood smoke and unwashed bodies. Lydia found Cole already seated, talking quietly with 2 other men who had the look of professional scouts. They fell silent when she approached, offering polite nods before returning to their conversation. The stew was hot and actually did taste like beef, and the bread was fresh enough to still be warm. Lydia ate with an appetite that would have scandalized her Boston dining companions, not caring about appearances or proper portions. Cole watched her with that slight smile that meant he was amused, but not unkindly so. Good? He asked. Better than good. I'm beginning to understand why people say hunger is the best seasoning. Wait until you've been eating nothing but hardtack and jerky for a week. Then even bad food tastes like heaven. After supper, Cole excused himself to see to the horses, leaving Lydia to make her way back to the room alone. The evening was cool, the storm-cleared sky already showing the first stars. She stood outside for a moment, breathing air that smelled of pine and distance, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this rough settlement. First time out west? Lydia turned to find one of the men from supper, the older one with gray in his beard and lines around his eyes that spoke of a life lived hard. He was smiling, but something about it made her uncomfortable. Yes, she said carefully. Thought so. You got that look about you. Clean. He moved closer, and Lydia caught the smell of whiskey. A pretty thing like you shouldn't be traveling with just one man. Dangerous. All kinds of things could happen. I assure you, Mr. Tanner is more than adequate protection. Tanner? The man's expression shifted, calculation replacing whatever had been there before. Cole Tanner. Tall drink of water. Quiet. Fast hands. I don't know about fast hands, but yes, Cole Tanner. The man stepped back, holding up his hands in a gesture of retreat. No offense meant, miss. Didn't realize you were traveling with him. That changes things. Why? Lydia asked, genuinely curious. Do you know him? Know of him. Most folks on the frontier do. Man's got a reputation. At Lydia's questioning look, he elaborated. Story goes he killed 3 men in Deadwood back in '80. Fair fight, but still. Word is he's fast enough and mean enough that smart people don't test him. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Lydia standing in the growing darkness, processing this new information. Cole had killed men. 3 men. It shouldn't have surprised her. She'd seen the way he wore his gun, the way his eyes constantly assessed threats. But hearing it stated so baldly was different. She found herself thinking about the quiet cowboy who'd helped her across the river, who'd shared his blanket in the storm, who'd admitted to crying during his first blizzard. That man and the one who'd killed 3 people in a gunfight existed in the same body. The frontier, she was learning, made room for contradictions. Cole appeared from the stable as she stood there, saw her expression, and stopped. What happened? Nothing happened. I just learned something about you, about Deadwood. His face went carefully neutral. Who told you? One of the men from supper. Is it true? Did you kill 3 men? Cole looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him making the same calculation he always made. How much truth to share, how much to hold back. Yes, he finally said. It's true. What happened? Does it matter? Yes, Lydia said firmly. It matters to me. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Come on, this isn't a conversation for the yard. They walked beyond the fort's buildings to where a split-rail fence marked the edge of the settlement. Beyond it, darkness stretched toward invisible mountains. Cole leaned against the fence, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. I was working a gold claim, he said quietly. Small operation, barely profitable, but honest. 3 men decided they wanted it, offered to buy me out for half what it was worth. When I said no, they came back the next night with guns. Said they'd take it, and I could leave alive or dead. My choice. So you fought. I didn't want to. I tried to talk them down, tried to offer a fair split. They weren't interested. His voice had gone flat, distant. First man drew on me. I was faster. Second man went for his gun while I was still holding mine on the first. I shot him too. Third man should have run. Instead, he came at me with a knife. And you killed him? Yes. Cole turned to look at her directly. I killed all 3 of them. The marshal ruled it self-defense, which it was, but that doesn't change what I did. Doesn't change that I'm capable of it. Lydia studied his face, seeing the tension there, the expectation of judgment. Were you afraid? The question clearly surprised him. Terrified. Every time I've been in a fight, I've been terrified. Anyone who tells you different is a liar or a fool. But you did it anyway. Because the alternative was dying or being driven off land that was rightfully mine. He looked back toward the darkness. I'm not proud of it, Miss Monroe. But I'm not ashamed either. Those men made their choices. I made mine. In the end, I'm alive and they're not. That's the arithmetic of survival out here. Lydia moved to stand beside him at the fence, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. The man who told me about Deadwood seemed afraid of you. Said you have a reputation. I probably do. Cole's voice carried a note of resignation. One fight gets exaggerated into 10. 3 men becomes a dozen. By the time a story crosses a few territories, Cole Tanner becomes some kind of legendary gunfighter instead of just someone who got lucky and stayed alive. Do you think that's what my father knew when he hired you, that you could protect me because you're dangerous? Maybe. He was quiet for a moment. Or maybe he knew I'd do it because I owed him, and I'm the kind of man who pays his debts. Either way, you're safe with me. That's what matters. I know, Lydia said, and meant it. The revelation about his past should have frightened her. By all logic, learning that her escort had killed multiple men should have sent her running for help. Instead, she felt oddly reassured. Cole was dangerous, yes, but his danger was aimed outward, protecting rather than threatening. I trust you. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You shouldn't say that lightly. I'm not saying it lightly. I'm saying it because it's true. She met his eyes steadily. You've had countless opportunities to hurt me or take advantage if that was your nature. Instead, you've been nothing but respectful and protective. Your past doesn't change who you are now. Who I am now is still shaped by that past. Of course it is. All of us are shaped by where we've been. Lydia thought about her own past, the suffocating expectations, the burned manuscript, the years of feeling like she was screaming into a void that swallowed every word. But we're not trapped by it. You said yourself that you were writing a different story. This is part of that story, choosing to protect instead of threaten, to honor debts instead of taking what you want. Cole shook his head slowly, but there was something like relief in his face. You're either very wise or very naive, and I haven't figured out which yet. Can't I be both? Lydia smiled. Wise enough to recognize character, naive enough to believe people can change? If you can be both, then there's hope for the rest of us. He straightened from the fence. You should get some sleep. Tomorrow we head into country that makes everything we've seen so far look easy. I need you rested and ready. Lydia nodded but didn't move immediately. The night was beautiful in its vastness, the stars so bright they cast actual shadows. Standing here with Cole, talking about truth and survival and trust, felt important in a way she couldn't quite articulate. Cole? She said as he started to walk away. Thank you for telling me. About Deadwood. You could have lied or refused to talk about it. Thank you for being honest. He paused, his back to her. You deserve honesty. You've been honest with me about what you're running from. Seemed only fair to be honest about what I'm running toward. What are you running toward? Still figuring that out. He glanced back, his face half in shadow. But I think it might be something better than what I'm leaving behind. He walked away then, heading back toward the stable, leaving Lydia standing at the fence with her thoughts and the stars, and a growing certainty that this journey was changing her in ways she couldn't yet fully comprehend. She stayed there a while longer, breathing the clean mountain air, thinking about courage and fear, and the strange alchemy that turned one into the other. A week ago, the idea of being alone at the edge of the wilderness at night would have terrified her. Now it felt natural, even peaceful. The frontier was teaching her its lessons, whether she was ready or not. When she finally returned to her room, she found a folded blanket outside her door with a note in rough handwriting. Extra, in case you get cold. CT. Such a small gesture, practical and thoughtful. Lydia carried the blanket inside, pressing it briefly to her face. It smelled like leather and wood smoke, and something that was distinctly coal, the scent of safety, if safety had a smell. She lay in the narrow bed, too tired to sleep despite her exhaustion, replaying the day's conversations in her mind. Cole Tanner was becoming a puzzle she wanted to solve, each conversation revealing new pieces while somehow making the whole picture more complex. He was dangerous and gentle, capable of violence and capable of kindness, haunted by his past but working towards something better. And she was beginning to realize, with a flutter of something between excitement and terror, that she was drawn to him in ways that had nothing to do with his role as her protector. The thought should have alarmed her, should have sent her mentally retreating behind the walls of propriety and social expectation. Instead, Lydia found herself wondering what it would be like to be seen by him, really seen, not as a responsibility or a debt, but as a woman he chose to notice. Dangerous thoughts for a woman traveling alone with a man she'd known less than a week. Dangerous thoughts for someone who'd spent her whole life having her desires dismissed or redirected. But maybe, Lydia thought as sleep finally pulled her under, danger was exactly what she needed. Maybe safety had been the real trap all along. Morning brought the sound of rain again, though lighter this time, more mist than downpour. Cole was waiting in the dining hall with coffee and a serious expression that suggested the day ahead wouldn't be easy. Weather's moving in for real this time, he said without preamble. We need to make serious miles today and tomorrow. After that, we're in the high passes, and rain up there means something different than rain down here. What does it mean? Cold. Potentially dangerous cold. The passes can get snow even in summer if conditions are right. He studied her face. I'm not trying to scare you, just preparing you. The next week is going to test everything you've learned so far. They left Fort Bridger in the rain, pushing northwest toward the mountains that were now visible as massive shadows through the mist. The trail climbed steadily, the vegetation changing as they gained altitude. Sagebrush gave way to juniper, juniper to pine. The air grew thinner, making Duchess breathe harder on the inclines. By midday, they were high enough to look back and see the valley spread below them like a map. The rain had stopped, leaving everything dripping and fresh. Ahead, the mountains rose in ranks. First foothills, then higher peaks, and finally the snow-capped giants that marked the spine of the continent. "We'll cross through South Pass," Cole explained during a brief rest. "It's the easiest route, which is why it's also the most traveled. But easy is relative. We're still talking about mountain passes and uncertain weather with limited shelter. You've done this before? 3 times. Twice with wagon trains, once solo. It's never the same trip twice. Mountains are moody. What's clear one day can be lethal the next." They pushed on through the afternoon, climbing steadily. Lydia's lungs burned with the altitude, and she found herself breathing hard even during the slower stretches. Cole noticed, of course, and adjusted their pace accordingly. "Take small breaths," he instructed. "Air's thinner up here. Your body needs time to adjust." As evening approached, they reached a sheltered spot beneath a rock overhang that offered protection from wind and weather. Cole declared it good enough for camp, and they set about the now familiar routine of caring for horses, gathering firewood, and preparing a simple meal. The temperature dropped fast after sunset, plummeting from comfortable to cold in what felt like minutes. Lydia huddled close to the fire, wrapped in both blankets, and still felt the chill seeping into her bones. "Come here," Cole said quietly. When she looked at him questioningly, he gestured to the space beside him, where he'd arranged the saddles as a windbreak. "Body heat works better than blankets. I won't touch you inappropriately, but I also won't let you freeze because of propriety." Lydia hesitated for only a moment before moving to sit beside him. He arranged the blankets around both of them, creating a cocoon of shared warmth. The intimacy of it was undeniable. His shoulder against hers, his breath visible in the cold air, the solid presence of him close enough to feel his heartbeat. "Better?" he asked. "Much." And it was. The cold receded, pushed back by the simple miracle of shared body heat. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire and the stars beyond it. The night was so clear that the Milky Way looked like a river of light overhead. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called and another answered. "Can I ask you something?" Lydia said into the quiet. "You're going to anyway." She smiled at the familiar response. "Why did you really take this job? And don't say because you owed my father. There must have been other ways to pay that debt." Cole was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling upward. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. "Because your father said his daughter was brave enough to choose an uncertain future over a certain cage. He said you reminded him of someone. Didn't say who, but I got the sense it was someone he'd loved and lost." Cole shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket around them. "And because I understood what it meant to need escape, to feel like the life everyone expected you to live was slowly suffocating you." "You felt that way? About what people expected?" "Still do sometimes. There's this weight of reputation, of who people think you are versus who you actually are. They see the gun, the scars, hear the stories, half of them exaggerated or outright false, and they decide they know you, decide you're dangerous or violent or whatever fits their narrative." He paused. "But you didn't do that. Even after learning about Deadwood, you looked at me and saw, I don't know, something other than the story." "I saw you," Lydia said simply. "The man who gives me his blanket when he thinks I'm cold. The man who taught me to ride properly because he didn't want me in pain. The man who's patient with my questions even when they're probably annoying. They're not annoying. Even when I ask why the sky is bluer here than in Boston." He smiled. She could hear it in his voice. "Even then, though for the record it's because there's less moisture and pollution in the air. The atmosphere scatters light differently." "See? Patient." Lydia leaned slightly closer, drawn by the warmth and the moment and something deeper she didn't want to examine too closely. "Cole, can I tell you something?" "Always." "I'm not afraid anymore. Of the journey, I mean. There are moments, like the river crossing or the storm, where I'm terrified in the moment. But the overall fear I started with, that sense that I'd made a terrible mistake, it's gone." She took a breath. "You did that. Made me feel capable instead of helpless. Made me believe I could actually survive this. You would have been fine without me, Cole said, but his voice had gone rough. You're stronger than you think. Maybe. But I wouldn't have discovered that without someone believing it first. She turned to look at him, their faces suddenly close in the firelight. So thank you. For seeing strength when I could only see fear. Cole held her gaze, and in his blue eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. Not just recognition or respect, but something warmer, something that echoed the flutter in her own chest. The space between them felt charged, weighted with possibility. Lydia, he said, her name rough on his tongue, stripped of the formal Miss Monroe for the first time. Thunder rolled across the mountains, cutting off whatever he'd been about to say. They both looked up to see lightning flickering in the distance, illuminating massive clouds building over the peaks. Another storm, Cole said, the moment broken. But his voice was shaken, and when he pulled the blankets tighter around them, his hand lingered a moment longer than necessary on her shoulder. The storm hit an hour later with a fury that made the previous one look gentle. Lightning turned night into day, thunder shook the ground, and rain fell in sheets so thick it was like standing behind a waterfall. Their rock overhang provided some shelter, but wind drove the rain sideways, soaking them despite the protection. Cole pulled Lydia back against his chest, wrapping both arms and all their blankets around them, his body a shield between her and the worst of the weather. She could feel his heart hammering, his breath warm against her hair, his strength surrounding her like armor. I've got you, he said against her ear, barely audible over the storm's roar. You're safe. I promise you're safe. And despite the lightning and thunder and the violence of nature unleashed, Lydia believed him. Because in Cole's arms, with his steady voice and steadier heart, she felt safer than she'd ever felt in her carefully protected Boston life. The storm raged until past midnight, finally spending itself in a last fury of wind and rain before moving east. When silence finally returned, broken only by dripping water and the horses' nervous movements, neither Cole nor Lydia moved from their tangled shelter. You all right? He asked eventually. Yes. Lydia's voice was muffled against his chest. Are you? Yeah? His arms loosened slightly but didn't release her. That was intense. They're going to keep coming, aren't they? The storms. Probably. Weather's unstable in the mountains. We just have to stay alert and find shelter when we can. He finally pulled back, though his hands remained on her shoulders. You did good. Didn't panic. Because you were here. The words came out more honest than she'd intended, raw with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. In the dying firelight, she saw his expression shift, surprise, then something that looked almost like pain. Lydia, I need you to understand something. I'm your escort, your protector. There's a line between that and anything else. A line I shouldn't cross. Who decided where that line is? Every rule of decent behavior, your father's trust, my own sense of honor. But even as he said it, his hands remained on her shoulders, his thumbs moving in small circles against the blanket. You're under my protection. That means certain things are off limits no matter what He stopped abruptly. No matter what you what. Lydia's heart was racing now, pounding so hard she was certain he could feel it. Cole met her eyes, and in them she saw a war between duty and desire, between the man he was trying to be and the man he actually was. No matter what I might want, he finished quietly. The confession hung between them, trembling with implications. Lydia felt something unlock in her chest, a door opening onto possibilities she'd barely let herself imagine. And what if what you want is the same thing I want? She whispered. Then we're both in trouble. But he didn't move away. Instead, impossibly, he leaned closer, his forehead coming to rest against hers. Because I'm supposed to deliver you safely to Oregon, not what? Not fall for you somewhere between Wyoming and wherever we're standing now. The words hit like lightning, illuminating everything. Lydia's hand came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palm. Cole, don't, he said roughly. Don't say anything that makes this harder. Please. But Lydia had spent her entire life not saying things that needed to be said, swallowing words to keep peace or preserve propriety. She was done with that version of herself. I don't want Oregon anymore. she said clearly. I want this. I want you. I want the freedom to choose something real instead of safe. Cole closed his eyes, and she felt him shudder. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I want. She felt bold and terrified and completely certain all at once. The question is whether you're brave enough to want it too. He pulled back then, creating distance, his face torn between longing and restraint. I am many things, Lydia Monroe, but brave enough to risk your reputation, your future, your safety, for something as selfish as my own feelings? I don't know if I'm that brave. Then let me be brave for both of us. And before she could think better of it, before fear or propriety could stop her, Lydia leaned forward and kissed him. For a heartbeat, Cole froze. Then, with a sound that was half groan, half surrender, he kissed her back. His hand came up to cup her face, gentle despite the intensity of the kiss. His lips were warm, tasting of coffee and rain and possibility. The world narrowed to just this, the slide of his mouth against hers, the catch of his breath, the way his hand trembled slightly against her cheek. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers again. God help me, he whispered. This is the worst idea I've ever had. Or the best, Lydia countered. That remains to be seen. But he was smiling. She could hear it in his voice. We need to talk about this. Really talk. When we're not exhausted and storm-battered and making decisions we might regret come morning. I won't regret it. Then you're braver than I am. He kissed her forehead softly, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. Get some sleep. Whatever this is, it'll still be here in the morning. They settled back against the saddles, closer than propriety allowed, but not as close as desire demanded. Cole kept one arm around her shoulders, and Lydia let herself relax into his warmth, into the solid reality of him. Cole? She murmured as sleep began to pull her under. Yeah? Thank you for being brave enough to be honest. Even when it's hard, his arm tightened around her. Thank you for not giving up on me when you learned about Deadwood, for seeing past the reputation to the person underneath. That's easy, Lydia said, already half asleep. The person underneath is worth seeing. She felt him press another kiss to the top of her head, so light she might have imagined it. But she didn't imagine the way he held her as she fell asleep, or the way his breathing eventually synchronized with hers, or the sense that something fundamental had shifted between them, some barrier crossed that, once passed, could never be uncrossed. Whatever lay ahead, mountains, storms, the remaining miles to Oregon, they would face it as something more than escort and client. They would face it as two people who'd chosen, against all wisdom and propriety, to be honest about what they felt. And that honesty, Lydia thought as sleep finally claimed her, was worth whatever consequences might follow. Dawn broke cold and clear, the storm-washed world glittering with frost that hadn't been there when they'd fallen asleep. Lydia woke slowly, consciousness returning in layers. First awareness of cold air on her face, then the warmth pressed against her side. Then the memory of what had happened the night before crashing over her like a wave. She'd kissed Cole Tanner. More accurately, she'd thrown propriety out the window and kissed him, and he'd kissed her back with an intensity that still made her pulse quicken. And then he'd said he was falling for her. Lydia opened her eyes to find him already awake, watching her with an expression that mixed wonder and worry in equal measure. They were still tangled together under the blankets, closer than any unmarried couple should be, and the intimacy of it sent heat flooding through her despite the morning chill. Morning, Cole said quietly, his voice rough with sleep and something else. Good morning. Lydia felt suddenly shy, uncertain how to navigate this new territory between them. Did you sleep? Some. His hand was still resting on her waist, and he seemed to realize it at the same moment she did, pulling back slightly. We should talk about last night. Should we? Lydia sat up, immediately missing his warmth. Or should we just acknowledge that something changed and move forward? It's not that simple. Cole stood, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she was learning meant he was working through something difficult. Your father trusted me to protect you, not to... He gestured helplessly between them. This complicates everything. Life is complicated, Lydia said, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. But that doesn't make it wrong. Doesn't make it right either. He moved to check on the horses, putting physical distance between them. We've still got 10 days of trail ahead, maybe more depending on weather and conditions. What happens when we reach Oregon? When your aunt asks how the journey was, and I have to explain that somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as a responsibility and started seeing you as... He stopped abruptly. As what? Lydia pressed. Cole turned back to face her, and the raw honesty in his expression took her breath away. As someone I can't imagine leaving behind. The confession hung in the cold morning air, weighted with implications neither of them was quite ready to examine. Before Lydia could respond, Cole continued, his tone shifting to something more practical, as if retreating into logistics was safer than dealing with emotions. We need to cover serious ground today. The pass is still 2 days out, and I want us through it before the next weather system moves in. He began saddling the horses with efficient movements. Whatever this is between us, we need to stay focused. The mountains don't care about our feelings, and they'll kill us just as dead whether we're in love or strangers. The word love echoed like a gunshot. Cole seemed to realize what he'd said, his hand stilling on the saddle straps. He didn't take it back, though. Instead, he just kept working, leaving the word hanging there between them like a promise or a threat. They broke camp in relative silence, the easy camaraderie of previous mornings replaced by a tension that wasn't entirely comfortable but wasn't unpleasant either. It was the tension of possibility, of something building that neither of them knew how to name or control. The trail climbed steadily through pine forests that smelled of resin and morning frost. The higher they went, the thinner the air became, until Lydia found herself breathing hard even at a walking pace. Cole set a measured rhythm, pushing forward but not so hard that the altitude would overwhelm them. Around midday, they stopped at a high meadow where snowmelt created a rushing creek. While the horses drank, Cole pulled out his field glasses and scanned the trail behind them, something he'd done periodically throughout the morning. Problem? Lydia asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. Maybe. He lowered the glasses, his expression troubled. There's been a rider on our back trail for the last 2 hours. Could be coincidence. This is the main route west, but they're maintaining consistent distance like they're tracking rather than traveling. Tracking us? Why would anyone track us? Could be 100 reasons, most of them not good. Cole collapsed the glasses and returned them to his pack. We're going to adjust our plans. There's an alternate route through a side canyon, rougher trail, but more defensible. If someone's following with bad intent, I'd rather face them on ground I choose. Fear curled in Lydia's stomach. You think it's the men from before? The ones trying to extort travelers? Doubt it. They work the lowlands where there's more traffic. This is something else. He helped her back onto Duchess, his hand lingering a moment on her leg. Stay close to me. If I tell you to run, and you don't look back. Understood? I'm not leaving you to face danger alone. Lydia, Cole's voice was sharp with worry. If something happens to me, you need to get to safety. Follow the creek down valley. It'll lead you to a settlement eventually. You've got supplies. You know how to handle a horse. Promise me you'll run if I tell you to. No. Lydia met his eyes steadily. I spent my whole life running from things. Expectations, confrontation, difficult truths. I'm done running. Whatever comes, we face it together. Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. You're going to make me gray before my time, he muttered, but there was grudging respect in his voice. They turned off the main trail onto a narrow path that wound through dense forest. The canopy closed overhead, creating a green twilight even at midday. The sound of their horses' hooves was muffled by pine needles, and Lydia found herself unconsciously holding her breath, listening for sounds of pursuit. The ambush came where the trail narrowed between two large rock formations. The perfect place for it, Cole would reflect bitterly later. One moment they were riding in tense silence, the next a voice called out from above. Hold up there, Tanner. Cole's hand went to his gun, but he didn't draw. Lydia followed his gaze up to the rocks, where a man stood with a rifle pointed directly at them. He was maybe 40, with a face like weathered leather and a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw, pulling his mouth into a permanent sneer. Parker, Cole said flatly, and Lydia heard a world of history in the way he said the name. Surprised you remember me." The man, Harker, smiled, but it was the smile of a predator. "Course, I guess a man remembers the family of someone he killed." "Your brother drew first," Cole said, his voice carefully neutral. "Marshall ruled it self-defense." Marshall wasn't family. Harker's rifle didn't waver. "My brother might have been a fool, but he was my blood. You took that from me." "He made his choice," Cole replied. "Same as I made mine. If you're here for revenge, let's get it done. But the woman's not part of this. Let her go." "Oh, she's very much part of this." Harker's eyes flicked to Lydia with an expression that made her skin crawl. "See, killing you quick would be a mercy, but making you watch someone you care about get hurt? That's suffering. That's justice." Before Cole could respond, two more men emerged from the rocks, younger, harder, with the look of hired guns. One moved to flank them from the left, the other from the right, creating a triangle of threat with no good escape route. "You've been planning this," Cole said, his voice still admirably calm despite the situation. "Following us from Fort Bridger?" "Before that, got word you were escorting some rich man's daughter west. Figured you'd come this way eventually." Harker's smile widened. "Been real patient, Tanner. Been thinking about this moment for 3 years." 3 years is a long time to nurse a grudge. 3 years is nothing compared to the rest of my brother's life he didn't get to live. Harker raised his rifle to his shoulder, sighting carefully. "Now, we can do this quick, or we can do it slow. Your choice. Either way, you're leaving these mountains in a pine box, and your lady friend, well, she's going to wish we'd killed her quick, too." Lydia felt her heart hammering so hard it hurt. This was it. The moment of real danger she'd known was possible, but had somehow never quite believed would actually come. They were outnumbered and outgunned, trapped in a killing ground with a man motivated by revenge and the hired guns backing him up. But Cole wasn't panicking. She could see him calculating, assessing angles and distances with the same focused intensity he brought to reading weather or evaluating trail conditions. And she remembered what he'd said about survival, that it wasn't about being unafraid, but about acting despite the fear. "All right," Cole said slowly, raising his hands away from his gun. "You win. Just let me say goodbye to her first." "You can give me that much." Harker considered this, then nodded sharply. "Make it quick." Cole turned Duchess's head toward Lydia, bringing the horses close together. Under the pretense of leaning in to speak to her, he whispered urgently, "When I move, you run Duchess hard left into the trees. Don't stop. Don't look back. Follow the creek like I said." "I told you I'm not running," Lydia breathed back. "And I'm telling you I need you alive more than I need you brave." His blue eyes bored into hers with desperate intensity. "Please, Lydia, don't make me die knowing I got you killed too." Before she could respond, Cole suddenly turned and spurred his horse directly at Harker, his hand dropping to his gun in a draw so fast it was almost invisible. The crack of gunfire split the air as Cole fired, even as his horse lunged forward, the shot catching Harker in the shoulder and sending him stumbling backward. Everything exploded into chaos. The two hired guns opened fire, bullets whining past Lydia's head. Cole's horse crashed into the rocks where Harker had been standing, forcing the wounded man to scramble aside. Duchess, trained for trail work but not combat, reared in terror. And Lydia, who'd spent her entire life being told she was delicate and needed protection, made a choice. Instead of running, she yanked hard on Duchess's reins, bringing the panicking horse under control through sheer force of will. The gun Cole had insisted she carry, the small revolver she'd protested learning to use, was suddenly in her hand, though she couldn't remember drawing it. One of the hired guns was taking aim at Cole's back as he grappled with Harker. Lydia pointed and fired. The shot went wide, missing the gunman but close enough to make him dive for cover. It bought Cole precious seconds to roll away from Harker's knife and come up with his own gun aimed and steady. "Drop it," Cole commanded, his voice cold as winter. "All of you, drop your weapons or I start dropping bodies." For a moment it hung in the balance. Then the hired gun Lydia had shot at slowly lowered his rifle. The other one followed suit. Harker, bleeding from his shoulder and now with Cole's gun pointed at his head, had no choice but to comply. "Lydia," Cole said, not taking his eyes off the three men. "Pick up those rifles, carefully. If anyone so much as twitches wrong, I want you to run." I told you, she started. I know what you told me. Now his voice carried a note of something that might have been pride mixed with exasperation. And apparently you meant it. Now please, do what I'm asking. Lydia dismounted on shaking legs and collected the discarded rifles, keeping well clear of the three men. Up close, she could see fear replacing the predatory confidence they'd worn earlier. Facing an armed woman and a man with Cole's reputation had apparently adjusted their risk assessment. Here's how this is going to work, Cole said, his gun never wavering. You three are going to walk north, away from the trail. You're going to keep walking until you hit the railroad, then you're going to get on a train heading east and never come back to this territory. Because if I see any of you again, I won't give you the chance to drop your weapons. I'll just shoot. Clear? My shoulder, Harker started. Will heal or won't. Not my concern. Cole's voice was ice. Your brother made a choice 3 years ago. Today you made yours. The only reason you're alive right now is because I don't want to kill you in front of the woman I love. But that mercy has limits. Test me again and you'll find them. Lydia's heart stuttered at the words, woman I love, said so calmly in the middle of this standoff, as if they were a simple fact rather than a confession that changed everything. Harker looked between Cole and Lydia, seemed to see something in their faces that convinced him, and nodded slowly. You've made an enemy today, Tanner. I've had enemies before. Most of them are dead. Cole gestured with his gun. Walk! Now! The three men turned and began walking north, Harker clutching his bleeding shoulder, the two hired guns supporting him. Cole kept his gun trained on them until they disappeared into the trees, only then allowing himself to lower it with a shaking hand. Are you all right? He asked, turning to Lydia. Did they hurt you? Did any bullets? I'm fine, Lydia managed, though she was trembling so hard she could barely stand. Cole, I shot at someone. I actually pulled the trigger and you saved my life. He closed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, gun still in one hand, the other wrapped around her as if he'd never let go. That man had a clear shot at my back. If you hadn't fired when you did, but I told you to run, he said against her hair, his voice rough. I gave you an out and you didn't take it. You could have been killed. So could you. Lydia pulled back enough to look at his face. I told you I was done running. I meant it. Cole looked at her with an expression so intense it made her breath catch. Wonder and fear and something deeper, something that felt like recognition. Who are you? He asked softly. Boston finishing schools don't produce women who stand their ground in gunfights. Maybe they do, Lydia replied, when the women are given the chance to discover what they're capable of. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, tasting of fear and relief and the particular madness that comes from surviving when death was reaching for you. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Cole rested his forehead against hers. We need to move, he said finally. Harker might come back with reinforcements or decide that a bullet in the back is worth risking my gun. Either way, we can't stay here. They mounted quickly, Cole keeping his rifle across his saddle and his eyes constantly scanning the trees around them. Lydia found her own hand resting on the small revolver at her waist, no longer seeing it as a foreign object, but as a tool she now knew she could use if necessary. They rode hard for the rest of the afternoon, leaving the ambush site far behind and pushing higher into the mountains. The trail grew steeper and more treacherous, requiring all their concentration just to keep the horses safe on the narrow path. Several times they had to dismount and lead the animals across sections where a single misstep would mean a fatal fall. By the time they made camp that evening, in a sheltered spot well off the trail, with clear sight lines in all directions, both were exhausted in body and spirit. Cole built a small fire, just enough for warmth and coffee, and they sat close together as darkness settled over the mountains. Tell me about Harker's brother, Lydia said into the quiet. What really happened in Deadwood? Cole was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. His name was Jack Harker. He was young, maybe 21, and convinced he was a faster draw than he actually was. He and 2 friends had jumped my gold claim, and when I called them on it, Jack decided to make a name for himself by gunning down the man who stood up to them. And you killed him? I did. He cleared leather first. There were witnesses who testified to that. But I was faster. By the time his gun was level, He already had my bullet in him. Cole's voice was flat, reporting facts without emotion. His friends ran. Jack died in the street. The marshal investigated, ruled it justified, and that should have been the end of it. But family doesn't let things go, Lydia observed. Family rarely does. And in Harker's case, he couldn't accept that his brother made a stupid choice and paid for it. Easier to blame me than to admit Jack was young and foolish and got himself killed through his own arrogance. He looked at her directly. I don't regret defending myself, but I do regret that it was necessary. Every man I've killed stays with me. I see their faces sometimes, late at night. Wonder what they might have become if they'd made different choices. That's what makes you different from men like Harker, Lydia said quietly. You carry the weight of it. You don't celebrate death, even when it's justified. Doesn't make me a good man. No, Lydia agreed. What makes you a good man is that you try to be better than your past, that you honor your debts and protect people weaker than yourself, that you could have taken advantage of me 100 times over on this journey, and instead you've treated me with nothing but respect and care. Cole reached out and took her hand, threading their fingers together. You make me want to be the man you see when you look at me. That's a heavy responsibility. Good, Lydia said, squeezing his hand. Carry it, because I'm going to spend the rest of this journey and whatever comes after holding you to that standard. The rest of this journey and whatever comes after, Cole repeated slowly. You planning on keeping me around, Miss Monroe? I'm planning, Lydia said carefully, her heart racing, on not saying goodbye when we reach Oregon. I'm planning on finding a way for this, she gestured between them, to be more than just a trail romance that ends when the miles do. Your father's not going to approve. My father doesn't get to choose my life anymore. That's the whole point of this journey, taking control of my own story. She met his eyes steadily. The question is whether you want to be part of that story, or if I'm just a job that ends when I'm safely delivered to my aunt. Cole pulled her closer, until she was tucked against his side, his arms solid around her shoulders. I already told you, somewhere along this trail, I stopped seeing you as a responsibility. You're not a job, Lydia. He struggled for words. You're the first thing that's felt like home in longer than I can remember. Then come home with me, Lydia said, to wherever I end up, because I meant what I said. I don't want Oregon anymore. I want freedom, and I want to write, and I want you, in whatever order those things arrange themselves. They sat in silence for a while, both processing the enormity of what they were agreeing to. This wasn't a casual trail flirtation, easily forgotten when the journey ended. This was two people choosing each other despite all the practical reasons they shouldn't, despite the complications and uncertainties ahead. We should get some sleep, Cole finally said. We're still 2 days from the pass, and after what happened today, I want to be through it as fast as possible. They laid out their bedrolls close together, close enough to touch, but maintaining a careful distance. Not out of propriety anymore, but out of a shared understanding that if they closed that final gap, there would be no going back. The knowledge that they wanted each other, that there was something real building between them, made the restraint almost painful. Cole? Lydia said into the darkness. Yeah? Thank you for not dying today. She heard him huff a quiet laugh. Thank you for not running. Even though I'm still half angry, you didn't. Get used to it. I'm going to spend the rest of our time together, not doing what you tell me to. Rest of our time together, Cole repeated, and she could hear the smile in his voice. I like the sound of that. Lydia fell asleep with those words echoing in her mind, and for the first time since leaving Boston, she felt like she was traveling towards something instead of just running away. The mountains still loomed ahead, the pass still waited to be crossed, and dangers both known and unknown still threatened their path. But they would face it together, and that, Lydia was learning, made all the difference. The next morning brought clear skies and bitter cold, frost thick enough on their blankets that it crunched when Cole shook them out. They ate a quick breakfast of jerky and hardtack, both of them eager to put more distance between themselves and the ambush site. As they rode, Lydia found herself watching Cole with new appreciation, the way he constantly scanned their surroundings, the care he took with the horses, the unconscious competence with which he navigated this dangerous landscape. This was a man who'd survived through skill and awareness, who'd learned from hard experience what it took to stay alive in unforgiving country, and he'd chosen to use those skills to protect her. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because somewhere along the trail, she'd stopped being a job and become someone worth protecting, not for money, but for herself. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked, catching her staring. "You," Lydia admitted. "How you're nothing like what I expected when I started this journey. Better or worse?" "Different. Real." She guided Duchess around a fallen log. "The men I knew in Boston were all performance, saying the right things, wearing the right clothes, presenting carefully crafted versions of themselves that bore little resemblance to who they actually were. But you're just yourself. Honest about your past, honest about your limitations, honest about what you feel." "Dishonesty's too much work," Cole said. "Takes energy to maintain a lie. Energy better spent on staying alive and figuring out what actually matters." "And what actually matters?" He glanced back at her, his blue eyes serious. "Loyalty. Competence. Kindness when you can afford it, and strength when you can't. And," he paused, "finding someone who sees you for who you are and chooses you anyway." The words landed in Lydia's chest like a gift, precious and unexpected. "I choose you," she said simply. "Whatever comes after Oregon, whatever obstacles we face, I choose you." "Then I guess we're both choosing something terrifying and wonderful," Cole replied. "And if we survive the next 2 days, we'll figure out what that actually means in practice." "When we survive," Lydia corrected. "Not if. When." Cole smiled, and in that smile she saw belief. In her strength, in their future. In the possibility that two people from completely different worlds could find something worth fighting for in each other. They climbed higher into the mountains, leaving the ambush and its violence behind, riding toward the pass and whatever waited beyond. And with each mile, Lydia felt the certainty growing that she wasn't just crossing the continent anymore. She was crossing into a completely new life, one she was choosing for herself with eyes wide open and heart completely, terrifyingly full. The pass itself was a narrow gap between towering peaks, the trail winding through rock formations that seemed to have been carved by giants. Wind howled through the channel with a voice that sounded almost human, and the temperature dropped so low that their breath froze in the air before them. Lydia had thought she understood cold after the storms, but this was different. A bone-deep chill that no amount of layers could fully defeat. "Almost through," Cole called back to her, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Another 2 hours and we'll be on the downslope. Western side is gentler, warmer." Lydia nodded, not trusting her frozen lips to form words. Every muscle in her body ached from the cold and the tension of guiding Duchess along the treacherous path. One wrong step here, and horse and rider would plummet hundreds of feet onto rocks that would show no mercy. But they kept moving, because stopping in the pass meant freezing, and freezing meant dying. It was that simple, that brutal. The frontier had taught Lydia many lessons, but perhaps the most important was this. Survival required forward motion, even when every instinct screamed to stop and rest. When they finally emerged from the pass onto the western slope, the change was immediate and miraculous. The wind died to a whisper. The temperature rose by what felt like 20 degrees, and suddenly they could see for miles. Rolling foothills descending toward distant valleys, the promise of easier country ahead. Cole pulled up and turned to look at her, and what Lydia saw in his face made her chest tight. Pride, relief, and something deeper, something that looked like wonder. "You made it," he said, "through the hardest part of the journey. Most people break somewhere in those mountains. You didn't even bend." "I had a good teacher," Lydia managed through chattering teeth. "No." Cole dismounted and came to help her down from Duchess, his hands steadying her when her legs nearly buckled from exhaustion. "This was all you, the strength, the determination, the refusal to quit. I just showed you the trail. You're the one who walked it." They made camp in a sheltered spot where pine trees broke the wind and a small creek provided fresh water. Cole built a proper fire, the first in days, and the heat of it felt like a benediction. Lydia sat as close as she dared, letting warmth seep back into her frozen extremities, while Cole tended the horses with his usual thorough care. When he finally joined her by the fire, they sat in companionable silence for a long while, both processing what they'd accomplished. The past was behind them. The worst of the journey was over. Ahead lay easier miles and the eventual arrival in Oregon, in the life Lydia had been traveling toward for weeks now. Except that life no longer felt like the destination it once had. "What happens now?" Lydia asked quietly. "When we reach Oregon and my aunt's boarding house? When you fulfilled your obligation to my father?" Cole poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward into the darkening sky. "That depends on you, on what you want." "I want to write," Lydia said. "Real things, important things, stories about women's lives and the injustices we face and the strength we're not given credit for. I want my words to matter, to change minds, to contribute something meaningful to the world." "Then you'll do that," Cole said simply. "You've got the talent and the determination. The West needs voices like yours, people willing to tell uncomfortable truths. And I want you," Lydia continued, her heart racing. "I want to build something with you. Not because society expects it or because it's convenient, but because somewhere between Wyoming and here, you became the person I can't imagine living without." Cole set down his stick and turned to face her fully. In the firelight, his blue eyes were luminous, filled with an emotion so intense it made her breath catch. "I don't have much to offer," he said quietly. "No land, no fortune. Just whatever wages I can earn, and the clothes on my back. I'm not the kind of man your father would have chosen for you. Not the kind of match Boston would consider appropriate." "Good," Lydia said firmly. "Because I didn't cross 2,000 miles of wilderness to end up with appropriate. I came here to choose my own life, and I choose you, rough edges, dangerous past, and all. Even knowing I might never be respectable. That I'll always be the man who's killed people, who lives by his gun as much as his wits. You're already respectable where it matters, in how you treat people, in your honor, in your refusal to take advantage of power when you have it." Lydia moved closer, taking his hand. "Besides, respectability is overrated. I'd rather have real." Cole brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "You're remarkable, you know that? Absolutely remarkable." "I learned from watching you," Lydia said, "how to be brave even when terrified. How to keep moving forward even when stopping seems easier. How to be honest about what I feel instead of hiding behind pretty words and propriety." "Then we learned from each other." Cole pulled her close, and she went willingly, settling against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat strong and steady. "You taught me that not all wealthy Easterners are useless, that education and strength aren't mutually exclusive, that sometimes the bravest thing is choosing vulnerability." They sat like that as night fell completely, wrapped in each other and their blankets, watching stars emerge in impossible numbers. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, and another answered, wild voices in a wild land, singing their existence into the darkness. "Cole?" Lydia said eventually. "What's the plan? Realistically, what do we do when we reach Oregon?" He was quiet for a moment, thinking it through. "We go to your aunt's boarding house as planned. You get settled, meet her, see if Oregon is actually what you hoped it would be. I'll find work in the area. There's always need for good hands, especially ones who know the mountains. We'll court properly. Give ourselves time to be sure this isn't just trail romance that fades when real life returns." "And if real life doesn't change how we feel?" Cole's arm tightened around her. "Then we figure out our next steps together. Maybe I save enough to buy some land, start a small ranch. Maybe you establish yourself as a writer, find publishers who will take your work seriously. Maybe we build something neither of us can quite imagine yet, but that's ours." "I like that plan," Lydia said. "It's practical, but still leaves room for possibility. That's frontier living in a nutshell. Practical plans and impossible possibilities." He kissed the top of her head. "But whatever we build it honestly. No pretending to be something we're not. No hiding who we were or what we've done. Agreed?" "Agreed." Lydia tilted her face up to look at him. "Though I should warn you, I'm going to write about this journey. About what I learned, what I experienced, what changed in me. You'll probably end up in those pages. Will I be the dashing hero or the rough cowboy with questionable past?" "Both," Lydia said. "The truth is usually both. You'll be the man who showed me I was stronger than I knew, but also the man carrying his own scars and doubts. the complicated real person instead of a cardboard character. Fair enough. Cole stood, offering her his hand. Come on, let's get some actual sleep. Tomorrow we start the descent, and I want to make the Green River settlement by tomorrow night. There's a proper town there, real beds, and I can send a telegram to your father letting him know you're safe. They settled into their bedrolls, closer than they'd been sleeping before, fingers intertwined in the space between them. It was intimate without being improper, a promise of closeness while still maintaining the boundaries that mattered. Lydia? Cole said into the darkness. Yes? Thank you for not running. At the ambush, I mean. I know I told you to, but… He paused. The fact that you stayed, that you fought beside me instead of leaving me to face it alone, that meant something, means something. We're partners now, Lydia said simply. Partners don't abandon each other when things get dangerous. That's the whole point. She felt him squeeze her hand, and they fell asleep like that, connected by touch and choice. Two people who'd started as strangers and become something neither had expected, but both desperately wanted. The descent into the Green River Valley took a day and a half of steady riding through increasingly gentle country. The mountains gave way to foothills, the pine forests to mixed woodland, and finally to rolling grassland that reminded Lydia of the journey's beginning, though everything else had changed. She'd changed. The woman riding into Green River Settlement bore little resemblance to the proper Boston lady who'd stepped off the stage in Wyoming. That woman had been afraid of her own strength, uncertain of her capabilities, convinced that survival required protection from others. This woman knew she could face dangerous water crossings and mountain storms and armed ambushes. This woman had discovered reserves of courage she hadn't known existed, and she'd fallen in love with a cowboy who'd been paid to protect her, but had ended up showing her how to protect herself. Green River was bigger than Fort Bridger, an actual town with a main street, several stores, a church, and two competing hotels. Cole secured rooms at the better of the two. Separate rooms this time, with proper doors and locks, maintaining the appearance of propriety even as everyone could see the way they looked at each other. I'll send that telegram to your father, Cole said as they stood in the hotel lobby. Let him know you're safe, and we should reach Oregon in 4 or 5 days, weather permitting. Tell him I'm well, Lydia said, and thank him for choosing you. Make sure you tell him that his choice of Escort was exactly right. Cole nodded, something complicated moving across his face. I'll tell him. While he was at the telegraph office, Lydia took the opportunity to actually bathe for the first time in over a week, washing away layers of trail dust and discovering new freckles from the relentless sun. The woman in the mirror looked weathered, sun-darkened, somehow more substantial than the pale creature who'd left Boston. Her hands had calluses now, her arms showed actual muscle, and her eyes held a confidence that hadn't been there before. She dressed in her least trail-worn clothes and went down to the hotel restaurant, where Cole was already waiting. He'd cleaned up too, shaved and changed shirts, and the sight of him sitting there, this dangerous, complicated, honorable man who'd chosen her just as she'd chosen him, made her heart skip. Father's reply came back already, Cole said as she sat down. Telegraph office said he must have been waiting by the wire, because the response came in less than 20 minutes. What did he say? Cole pulled out the telegram and handed it to her. Lydia read her father's characteristically terse message. Glad she is well. Stop, Tanner. Tell her I knew she could do it. Stop. Thank you for keeping your word. Stop. Final payment sent to Oregon City. Stop. He knew I could do it, Lydia repeated, something tight in her chest loosening. Not that you could protect me, that I could do it. Your father's smarter than you give him credit for, Cole observed. He could have sent you by train in comfort and safety. Instead, he hired me to take you overland through the hardest country possible. That wasn't about your safety. That was about your strength. Lydia looked at the telegram again, seeing her father's decision through new eyes. Perhaps it hadn't been about driving her to Oregon to cure her of ambition. Perhaps it had been about giving her the kind of challenge that would prove, to herself and everyone else, exactly what she was capable of. I need to write to him, she said quietly. Really write, not just a telegram. Tell him that I understand now what he was trying to do. That I'm grateful, even though I was furious when this journey started. He'll appreciate that. Cole signaled the waiter. But tonight we eat actual food and sleep in actual beds and celebrate the fact that we survived the worst the trail could throw at us. The meal was simple but felt like a feast after weeks of jerky and hardtack. Real beef, fresh vegetables, bread that didn't require determination to chew. They ate slowly, talking about inconsequential things, both of them relaxing in a way they hadn't been able to for days. After dinner, they walked the town's main street as evening settled in. Green River was quiet, peaceful, the kind of frontier town that was transitioning from rough settlement to established community. It gave Lydia hope that civilization and wildness could coexist, that she wouldn't have to choose between the intellectual life she craved and the freedom she'd discovered. "What are you thinking?" Cole asked as they paused at the edge of town, looking out at the valley stretching westward. "That I'm not afraid anymore," Lydia said. "Of the future, of making wrong choices, of being too much or not enough. This journey taught me that I'm capable of more than I imagined. Whatever comes next, I can handle it." "Yes," Cole agreed, "you can. But you don't have to handle it alone. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You've got me now if you want me. Not because you need protection, but because we're better together than separate." Lydia turned to face him fully. This man who'd started as a hired escort and become her partner, her teacher, her choice. "Then ask me properly," she said. "Right now, under these stars in this wild place. Ask me what you've been working up to asking since the storm." Cole took her hands in his, and in the twilight she could see nervousness mixing with certainty in his expression. "I don't have a ring. Don't have land or money saved. All I've got is my skills, my word, and a heart that's completely, terrifyingly yours." "That's more than enough," Lydia said softly. "Lydia Monroe," Cole continued, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I was paid to escort you west. Somewhere along the trail, I lost count of the miles and found something worth more than any wage. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with a man who's more comfortable on horseback than in parlors, who's got a dangerous past and an uncertain future, but who will spend every day trying to be worthy of your choice?" Tears were streaming down Lydia's face now, but they were good tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said clearly. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll build a life with you. I'll take your uncertain future and add my impossible dreams, and we'll create something neither of us could have managed alone." Cole pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly for the first time since the storm, not desperate and fear-driven, but slow and certain and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. "We should tell your aunt when we arrive," Cole said. "Get her blessing before we make any formal plans." "We should," Lydia agreed. "But Cole? I don't need her blessing or my father's permission. I need you. And I need the freedom to choose my own path. Everything else is just details." They made the final stretch to Oregon City in 4 days of easy riding through beautiful country. The weather held clear and warm, the trail was well maintained, and they rode together in the comfortable intimacy of two people who'd chosen each other and were certain of that choice. Lydia used the riding time to mentally compose the letter she'd write to her father, explaining that she'd fallen in love with his hired escort, that she was going to marry a man with no fortune or prestigious family name, but that she'd never been more certain of anything in her life. She'd tell him that the journey he'd forced on her had given her exactly what she needed, just not in the way he'd expected. And she'd thank him for choosing Cole Tanner, for seeing something in a desperate 17-year-old that others had missed, for being the kind of man who gave second chances and then trusted people to deserve them. Catherine Morrison's boarding house was exactly as Lydia had hoped. A sprawling 2-story building on a tree-lined street, painted cheerful yellow with white trim and flower boxes in every window. When they rode up, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and Lydia's own gray eyes came down the front steps with her arms already opening. "Lydia? Good Lord, look at you!" Aunt Catherine caught her in a fierce hug the moment she dismounted. "You look like you've been through a war." "More like a mountain range," Lydia laughed. "Aunt Catherine, this is Cole Tanner. He's the guide Father hired to escort me west." "The guide who's looking at you like you hung the moon," Catherine said shrewdly, shaking Cole's hand with a grip that made him blink. "Welcome, Mr. Tanner. Any man who brings my niece through the Rockies in one piece deserves a proper meal and a comfortable bed." "Actually, Lydia said, taking a deep breath. Cole is more than my guide. We're getting married. Catherine's eyebrows rose, but her expression was more intrigued than shocked. Are you now? That was fast work. 2,000 miles gives you time to get to know someone, Cole said quietly, and your niece is the kind of woman worth knowing. She is indeed. Catherine studied them both with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Come inside. We'll get you settled, fed, and then you'll tell me everything. And I mean everything. How this happened, what your plans are, and whether my brother knows he's getting a cowboy for a son-in-law. Over the next few days, Lydia and Cole settled into a routine at the boarding house. Catherine gave Cole work helping with repairs and heavy lifting in exchange for room and board, and she listened to Lydia's plans for writing with the kind of serious attention Lydia had never received in Boston. You'll write for my newspaper, Catherine declared. I need someone who can articulate women's issues without sounding apologetic or shrill. Your Boston education plus your frontier experience makes you perfect. Lydia started writing immediately. Essays about the journey, about what she'd learned, about the gap between Eastern assumptions and Western realities. The words poured out of her like they'd been dammed up for years, and Catherine published them to immediate and enthusiastic response. Cole found work with a rancher outside town who needed someone with his skills. The pay was good, and within weeks he'd saved enough to start looking at parcels of land, small plots where they could build something of their own. 3 weeks after arriving in Oregon, a letter arrived from Lydia's father. She opened it with trembling hands, expecting anger or disappointment. Instead, she found something else entirely. Dearest Lydia, Ambrose Monroe had written in his precise script, your letter arrived yesterday, and I have read it 17 times, each time finding new cause for pride. You have done exactly what I hoped you would do, discovered your own strength, made your own choices, and claimed your independence. That you have also found a worthy partner in the process is better than I could have planned. Tell Cole Tanner that I expected nothing less than for him to fall in love with you. Your mother, God rest her soul, had the same fire you do, the same refusal to be limited by others' expectations. I saw her in you, and I knew the frontier would bring it out. I am only sorry it took me so long to give you the freedom to discover it yourself. You have my blessing and my love. Build the life you choose, write the words that matter, and know that your father is proud beyond measure. Your inheritance is being transferred to Oregon City Bank in your name alone, not as dowry, but as capital for whatever dreams you and Tanner choose to pursue. With all my love and respect, Father. Lydia read the letter 3 times through tears before showing it to Cole, who read it once and then pulled her into his arms. He knew, Lydia said against his chest. He knew this would happen. Maybe not the specific details, but he knew the journey would change me. Smart man, your father, Cole murmured. Manipulative, but smart. The best kind of manipulation, the kind that sets you free instead of trapping you. They were married a month later in Catherine's boarding house parlor, with half the town in attendance. It wasn't the elaborate Boston society wedding Lydia's mother had probably imagined for her daughter. Instead, it was simple and honest. Lydia, in a practical dress she could actually move in. Cole in his best clothes with his hair neatly trimmed, both of them speaking vows they'd written themselves. I promise to see your strength even when you doubt it, Lydia said, her voice clear and certain. To stand beside you in danger and in peace. To build a life that honors both who we were and who we're becoming. I promise to protect your freedom as fiercely as I once protected your safety, Cole replied. To support your dreams even when they're impractical. To choose you every day, not because I have to, but because I want to. Catherine pronounced them married with tears in her eyes, and the celebration that followed was raucous and joyful, frontier style, with fiddle music and dancing and toasts that went on until midnight. 6 months later, Cole and Lydia moved into a small ranch house they'd built together on land purchased with her inheritance and his savings, equal partners in every sense. Lydia continued writing essays that were being picked up by newspapers across the territory, gaining a reputation as a clear voice on women's rights and frontier life. Cole ran cattle and horses, building a modest but successful operation. He never quite lost the wariness that came from his dangerous past, but he also never had to use his gun in anger again. The man he was trying to become, honorable, steady, worthy of the trust Lydia placed in him, was slowly replacing the desperate boy he'd been. On a morning in early spring, Lydia woke to find Cole already up, standing at the window watching the sun rise over their land. She joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how much can change in a year," Cole said, covering her hands with his. "This time last year, I was a hired gun taking a job for debt and money. Now I'm married to the most remarkable woman I've ever met, living on land we own, building something that actually matters." "We built it together," Lydia corrected. "That's the important part. Neither of us could have done this alone." "No," Cole agreed. "We couldn't have." He turned in her arms, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. Pure joy, unguarded and complete. "Thank you for choosing me, for seeing past the rough exterior to whoever I'm becoming." "Thank you for teaching me I was strong enough to survive the journey," Lydia replied, "and brave enough to choose what I wanted instead of what was expected." Cole kissed her gently, a promise and a celebration all at once. When he pulled back, his hand came to rest on her stomach, where new life was just beginning to make itself known. "Looks like our next adventure's beginning," Lydia said, covering his hand with hers. Cole's smile was brighter than the sunrise behind him, his eyes glinting with that particular light she'd first seen in the Wyoming dust, the look of a man who'd found something worth protecting, worth building toward, worth being better for. "And this time, darling," he said softly, pulling her close, "we ride together. No more trail where we're just escort and client. No more pretending what's between us is anything other than what it is. Just us, building our life, facing whatever comes as partners." "As partners," Lydia echoed, looking around at the home they'd created. Simple but sturdy, practical but beautiful, everything they'd chosen together. Outside, horses grazed in the morning light. Inside, books lined the shelves next to Cole's carefully maintained equipment. It was a life that honored both of them, that made room for her words and his skills, her dreams and his hard-won stability. "I love you," she said, the words still new enough to carry weight. "I loved you somewhere back in the mountains, probably during that first storm, but I really understood it during the ambush, when I realized I'd rather die beside you than live safely without you." "I love you too," Cole said. "Probably fell the moment you argued with me about luggage, and I realized you weren't going to be an easy job. Definitely knew it when you refused to run, when you stood your ground and fired that pistol despite being terrified." They stood together in their home, in the life they'd chosen, watching the sun climb higher and paint everything gold. The journey that had brought them here, from that dusty Wyoming station through mountains and storms and danger, felt both impossibly long and remarkably brief. Lydia thought about the woman she'd been when it started, so desperate for escape that she'd been willing to cross a continent to find it. That woman had been looking for freedom in geography, thinking distance from Boston would solve everything. But real freedom, she'd learned, wasn't about location. It was about choice, about discovering your own strength and then choosing to share it with someone who saw that strength and loved you for it. About building a life that was honest and real instead of comfortable and false. "No regrets?" Cole asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Not a single one," Lydia said firmly. "Best decision I ever made was getting on that stage heading west. Second best was not running when you told me to. Third best was marrying a cowboy with a questionable past and uncertain prospects." "No," Lydia corrected, rising on her toes to kiss him again. "That was the best decision. Everything else just led me to you." They stood in the doorway of their home as morning fully arrived, two people who'd been paid to cross a continent together and had instead found something infinitely more valuable, a partnership built on honesty, a love forged through challenge, and a future they were creating together with every choice. The trail had tested them both and revealed who they truly were beneath the roles they'd been playing, and what they'd discovered was this. They were stronger together than separate, braver together than alone, and capable of building something beautiful from the rough materials of their combined pasts. "Come on," Cole said eventually, taking her hand. "Horses need feeding, and you've got that essay to finish for your aunt's paper. And you've got fence to mend on the north pasture." "Glamorous life we've chosen," Cole said with a grin. "Glamorous was never the point," Lydia replied, squeezing his hand. Real was the point. And this, she gestured at everything around them. This is about as real as it gets. They walked out together into the morning of their chosen life, neither looking back toward the trails they'd traveled or the people they'd been. The past had shaped them, but it didn't define them. They were writing new stories now, stories of their own choosing. And those stories Lydia knew as she settled at her desk later that morning to write while Cole worked the land outside her window would be worth every hard mile it had taken to get here, worth every storm weathered, every danger faced, every moment of fear transformed into courage. Because in the end, the cowboy who'd been paid to escort her west had given her something far more valuable than safe passage. He'd given her the space to discover her own strength, the courage to claim her own future, and a love that asked nothing except that she be completely, honestly herself. And she, in turn, had given him something equally precious, a reason to believe that his past didn't have to determine his future, that he could be more than his worst moments, that he was worthy of being chosen not in spite of his scars, but because of everything that had shaped him. Together, they'd taken a journey that was supposed to be about miles and arrived at something far more important, a destination they'd built together, one choice at a time, into a life that was authentically, completely theirs. The sun climbed higher, painting their ranch in warm light. Inside, Lydia wrote about truth and strength and the kind of love that doesn't rescue you but instead shows you how to rescue yourself. Outside, Cole worked the land they owned together, building something that would last. And in every moment, in every word written and fence post set, they were doing what they'd promised each other during that mountain storm. They were riding together, partners in every sense, facing their shared future with eyes open and hearts completely, bravely full. The trail had brought them together, but it was their choice to stay together, to build together, to love together that transformed a simple escort job into the kind of love story worth remembering. And that, in the end, was the greatest adventure of all.